This story of survival in an apocalyptic world kicks off with a harsh betrayal. The protagonist, Zhang Xiaoyong, finds himself suspended precariously above a cage packed with ravenous zombies. As if the situation wasn't dire enough, his ex-girlfriend sneers at him, taunting him about the deaths of all his friends. Her mockery reaches its peak as she assures him that his pathetic life is also nearing its end, soon to be just another addition to the carnage below. As Xiaoyong reflects on his misfortune, guilt and regret gnaw at him. He curses himself for trusting this treacherous woman, someone he now believes deserves a fate far worse than his. In her eyes, however, Xiaoyong's threats are meaningless. She's moved on to a wealthier, stronger man and tasks him with disposing of her former lover. Her new partner, a corpulent man named Fatty Li Shuxiong, eagerly agrees to the plan. He even suggests dragging out Xiaoyong's torment for her amusement. Before pushing the button that would seal Xiaoyong's fate, Li Shuxiong smugly thanked him for his generosity, gloating about the supplies they'd looted from him, which would keep them comfortable for months. With that, Xiaoyong was sent plummeting into the zombie pit. The frenzied zombies, driven by an insatiable hunger, swarmed Xiaoyong instantly. As agony overtook him, he clung to a desperate thought. If he could live his life again, he would make both Cui Jing and Li Shuxiong pay dearly for their betrayal. Suddenly, Xiaoyong jolted awake to the grating sound of Cui Jing's voice. She was nagging him, demanding to know why he hadn't added her name to the deed of his house. For a moment, he was disoriented. Was this a dream? Had he somehow gone back in time to before the apocalypse? Memories of his previous life flooded back. Cui Jing had conned him, stripping him of his parents' inheritance and leaving him homeless. Shortly after, the apocalypse descended, unleashing a global catastrophe that turned humans into mindless, flesh-hungry zombies. Despite the chaos, Xiaoyong had managed to survive, thanks to his resilience and the help of loyal friends. Together, they established a safe haven, fortified and well-stocked, where they could live without fear of the undead. But just when things seemed stable, Cui Jing returned, feigning desperation to win his sympathy. Xiaoyong, blinded by her deception, let her in, only for her to betray him once more. She sabotaged the safe zone, allowing their enemies to breach the gates, leading to the destruction of everything they'd built. Now, she was back, demanding an extravagant bride price and the deed to his home, as if her betrayal had never happened. This time, however, Xiaoyong was determined to take control. Though he kept his anger in check, he knew he needed a careful plan. Giving in to impulsive emotions could jeopardize everything. After pretending to agree to her demands, he sent Cui Jing away, leaving her stunned at his newfound confidence. Unused to being defied, she couldn't understand how her obedient slave had suddenly become so assertive. With Cui Jing out of the picture, Xiaoyong could finally focus. He had a month left before the apocalypse struck, and every second was precious. He vowed to prepare thoroughly this time, ensuring that no betrayal or misstep would threaten his survival. Then, something unexpected happened. A system notification popped up, resembling a video game interface. Xiaoyong discovered he had activated an apocalypse system, which came with missions designed to help him survive. His first task was titled Apocalypse Preparation, requiring him to secure a piece of land and stockpile enough supplies for a year. Completing the mission would earn him 10 points, which could be exchanged for valuable rewards in the system's store. Our protagonist was thrilled with the unexpected perk, the system's missions, and the rewards that came with completing them. What more could one ask for? However, the system store's offerings remained a mystery to him. It mostly stocked loot boxes and potions, such as those for boosting physical strength. Yet, his musings were interrupted by the loud growling of his stomach, reminding him he needed a proper meal. Reflecting on his past life, Xiaoyong recalled how he used to pinch every penny, starving himself to save for Cui Jing's bride price. But things are different now. Determined to indulge, he decided to treat himself to a luxurious meal. With the impending zombie apocalypse just a month away, he figured he should enjoy the finer things while they lasted. A few hours later, his delivery arrived. Xiaoyong marveled at the sight. It was a legendary Michelin 3-star takeaway. Never in his wildest dreams could he have afforded such a thing before. He eagerly dug into the $300 braised pork, savoring every bite. After surviving on scraps during the apocalypse, the taste was heavenly, almost surreal. But Xiaoyong didn't stop there. He went into full food enthusiast mode, devouring dish after dish. His appetite seemed insatiable, and he nearly polished off everything when his phone rang. The caller? Xiaoya, Cui Jing's friend. It seemed Cui Jing had wasted no time complaining to her. Xiaoyong reluctantly answered, only to be greeted by an ear-splitting tirade. Xiaoya berated him, questioning how he could dare to treat Cui Jing so poorly. She insisted Cui Jing was merely testing his love and claimed he had failed miserably. If he truly loved her, he'd prove it by handing over the deeds to his house and 1,000,000 yuan in cash as an apology. Xiaoya even offered to mediate with Cui Jing if he complied. If not, he could expect a breakup. Xiaoyong's patience snapped. Who did she think she was to test him like this? Furious, he told her off and ended the call. He was done with greedy women who only cared about money. His priority now was to secure a suitable piece of land. He envisioned building an impregnable fortress, easy to defend and strategically located near water and forest. The following morning, Xiaoyong visited a real estate agency. A friendly consultant greeted him, asking if he was looking to rent or buy. Xiaoyong confidently replied that he was after something more valuable. Just then, the sales manager, Zhu, appeared and brusquely ordered the consultant, Xiong, to help unload boxes of toilet paper. Despite Xiong's protest that she was assisting a customer, manager Zhu dismissed Xiaoyong outright, deeming him a broke nobody in shabby clothes who wasn't worth their time. The manager's arrogance irked Xiaoyong, who decided to put him in his place. He asked Zhu to repeat his words and explain his audacity in belittling others. Zhu, unfazed, doubled down, mocking Xiaoyong further. He even declared he'd eat a toilet on a live stream if Xiaoyong could afford to buy one. It was clear the manager was about to regret his words. Unbothered, Xiaoyong smirked and advised Zhu to prepare for a feast of porcelain. He clarified he wasn't here for a house, but to buy land. The announcement stunned everyone present. It wasn't every day someone came to buy land outright. Xiong quickly invited Xiaoyong to sit while she outlined the available options. Meanwhile, manager Zhu glared in disbelief, convinced Xiaoyong was bluffing. Xiong presented detailed listings, but Xiaoyong wasn't interested in browsing. He outlined his requirements instead. Land near mountains and running water, preferably with existing factories or large buildings. Xiong promised to check for suitable options. Manager Zhu, unable to resist butting in again, suggested a property in the Eastern District. Xiong hesitated, pointing out that the area, known as T-City Land, was filled with unfinished projects and abandoned factories, making it unsuitable for most buyers. Zhu dismissed her concerns, claiming no real customers had shown up anyway, and he suspected Xiaoyong was just wasting their time. Xiaoyong didn't care about the location as long as the land met his needs. He didn't mind the unfinished factories. Actually, they were a bonus since they would save him time and money. After reviewing the details, Xiaoyong confirmed that the land was exactly what he wanted. Without hesitation, he agreed to buy it. He was ready to sign the contract and make the payment. Xiong was shocked. No one in their right mind would buy land with incomplete factories, but Xiaoyong stood firm. He even urged her to hurry up because, as he put it, someone here is eager to eat some fresh poop. Manager Zhu stood there, holding the check, unable to wrap his head around what he was seeing. How was it even possible for this scrappy guy to pay 300,000 for land with old, run-down factories? It made no sense to him. Before leaving, Xiaoyong had reminded him of the payment. Now it was time for Zhu to fulfill his part of the deal. Meanwhile, to soften the blow, Xiaoyong sent a super chat donation to keep things light. Other customers in the store were urging Zhu to hurry up, as the stream had already started. One guy, whose stomach wasn't feeling too great, promised to at least make it fresh for the stream. Xiaoyong had completed the first task. The next step was to figure out how to turn the land purchase into a real business by gathering supplies. As he was leaving the real estate office, an old acquaintance, Li Shuxiong, spotted him and couldn't help but wonder what Xiaoyong was up to. But all thoughts flew out of his head when he saw what was going on inside. Manager Zhu was now being pressured by the staff and customers to keep his word, all while begging for help and desperately explaining he didn't want to go through with it. Meanwhile, Cui Jing was living carefree, painting her nails and enjoying the quiet life. That's when she got a call from Li Shuxiong, who asked if she knew Xiaoyong had just bought land at the real estate company. Shocked, she wondered where he had gotten so much money from. Li Shuxiong suggested it was probably the money he'd saved for the bride price. Cui Jing was furious. She couldn't believe Xiaoyong would use her money for something like that. Li Shuxiong urged her to stay calm and go talk to Xiaoyong about it, but Cui Jing's anger was blinding. She wasn't going to ask him anything. She was going to confront him. Back at his home, Xiaoyong was deep in thought about how to fund the supplies he needed to start building. Just then, There was a loud knock on the door. It was Cui Jing with her sister, still fuming over Xiaoyong's use of her money. Xiaoyong had no idea what she was talking about, and Cui Jing, with fire in her eyes, accused him of spending the bride price money to buy land. She claimed that since the money came from her, the land was hers too. Xiaoyong, stunned by her accusations, didn't know how to respond. Finally, he decided to give her a straightforward explanation. He had plenty of money, but none of it would go toward her. He also knew about her little fling with Li Shuxiu. Cui Jing was baffled, not understanding how he knew, but her sister, sensing where the conversation was heading, suggested they calm down and resolve the misunderstanding. Xiaoyong, however, wasn't having it. "There's no misunderstanding here," he said. "Cui Jing isn't my girlfriend. She's just a doormat for that old fat guy Li Shuxiu." He slammed the door in their faces, tired of the drama. Cui Jing still couldn't understand how he knew about her and Li Shuxiu. Her sister was just as confused, wondering why Cui Jing hadn't told her about her relationship with Li Shuxiu. Cui Jing quickly assured her it was nothing serious, just a few room rentals here and there. With things escalating out of control, they decided to head home and figure out their next move. But now, Xiaoya was thinking of taking things into her own hands and winning Xiaoyong over. After all, they were good sisters. The following day, Xiaoyong arrived at his new property with a construction crew. He was ready to rebuild one of the factories, but wasn't sure how long it would take. Foreman Li quickly assessed the situation and explained that reinforcing the walls, setting up defensive towers, installing barbed wire, thickening the steel doors, and adding bulletproof glass would take some time. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of enemy Xiaoyong had made to need such heavy fortifications. Xiaoyong just waved him off, telling him that some things were better left unknown. He wanted to know how much it would cost to finish the project in a month. The foreman shook his head, stating that it couldn't be done that quickly. Xiaoyong wasn't fazed, saying he had connections who could get the job done faster. The foreman, standing his ground, said that the safety of the workers was more important. This took Xiaoyong by surprise. He had never met a foreman with a conscience. It turned out, though, that the cost would just be higher. Xiaoyong asked him to give him the price without further delays. After some quick calculations, Foreman Li estimated that if they were to finish in a month, the workers would need to work non-stop, and the cost would come to 20 million yuan. They'd also require a 5 million yuan deposit to start immediately. Xiaoyong didn't find this ideal. He told them to get started right away, and he'd transfer the rest of the payment within a week. The construction company had nothing to fear. If he failed to pay, the land would be theirs. Out of nowhere, Xiaoya appeared at the construction site. She confidently walked up to him, wrapped her arm around his, and asked, "What are you doing here?" Xiaoyong was already tired of this woman. In his past life, she, along with Cui Jing, had driven him out of his parents' inheritance, and now he was ready to make her pay twice as much for everything she had done. No matter how much she pretended to be a good girl, he could see through her rotten nature. Xiaoya, seeing the construction site, asked with feigned interest, "Is this the land you bought? It's so beautiful here. I bet you want to build a villa, right?" But Xiaoyong didn't care about her assumptions or thoughts on what he should do with the land. Her attempts to act like she cared made him feel nothing but disgust. She couldn't understand his cold response. Normally, just a gentle touch from her on his arm would have made him nervous, but today, he didn't even flinch. Instead, he turned away from her indifferently, walking over to the construction workers to instruct them on fixing the gate, which needed to be widened. Xiaoya couldn't miss this opportunity. After Cui Jing had ruined everything for Xiaoyong, she thought this land might now be her chance. Xiaoyong returned home, his mind racing with ideas on how to get more money. After he had mortgaged his house, he received a loan of 3 million yuan, but that amount was barely enough to cover the first phase of construction. Still, considering the inevitable collapse of the world, he reasoned that it wouldn't matter. If he sold the house to a few buyers, it would be no problem. It was something that had to be dealt with no matter what. Then there was a knock on the door. Xiaoyong opened it to find his infuriating neighbor, Grandpa Li, standing there. This old man, who lived downstairs, was a wealthy, greedy person who owned the apartments on the first and second floors. He had been trying to buy the third floor from Xiaoyong, but Xiaoyong refused to sell. As a result, Grandpa Li had started making life difficult for him, painting the doors, scattering trash, leaving coffins by his doorstep, and jamming locks. The old man had done everything in his power to harass Xiaoyong, and now he was accusing him of throwing a party the night before. Xiaoyong, however, had gone to bed early and hadn't made any noise. But there was no point in arguing over the false accusation. Xiaoyong knew what Grandpa Li really wanted, his house. So, Pretending to be fed up, he told the old man he was ready to sell. Grandpa Li, shocked and surprised, could hardly believe his ears. Xiaoyong had a condition, though. He wanted to stay in the house for another 6 months, until he found a new place to live. But the old man had to transfer 5 million yuan into Xiaoyong's account immediately, so Xiaoyong could pay the deposit for the new house. If Grandpa Li didn't agree to this, the deal was off. The greedy old man couldn't let the opportunity slip by, so he agreed but insisted on signing a contract to make sure Xiaoyong couldn't change his mind. Xiaoyong had no issue with that. After all, the old man would still die in his house when the apocalypse began. Once Grandpa Li transferred the 5 million yuan, Xiaoyong now had a total of 8 million yuan, 3 million from the loan and 5 million from the old man. It was time to tackle the next task and earn the reward. The biggest supermarket in the area was the perfect place to get started. Xiaoyong set off to stock up on supplies for the coming year. The people around him watched him, thinking he was mentally unstable. They kept their distance as he pushed several grocery carts through the aisles. When he reached the checkout line, the onlookers laughed at him, thinking he was just another fool caught up in the doomsday rumors. But Xiaoyong didn't care about their judgment. What mattered was completing the task that the system had set for him. And once he did, he earned 10 points. With those points, he bought a special supply box from the system's store. Xiaoyong didn't hesitate. When he opened the box, he found a level 1 space ring, a personal subspace of 500 cubic meters, where time stood still and anything stored there would never spoil. This was an incredible gain. The fact that time stopped inside the subspace meant he could store fresh food without worrying about it going bad. Along with the new item, Xiaoyong received a new mission, 10 years of sustenance, which would reward him with 20 points for completion. But just as he was starting to process his new acquisition, he was approached by the security chief of the supermarket, Yang Tao. Yang Tao, a former high school classmate, recognized Xiaoyong. He had been the lackey of a local bully, extorting money from weaker students. Xiaoyong had frequently clashed with him back in the day. Today, Xiaoyong didn't expect to run into Yang Tao here. Yang Tao insisted that Xiaoyong put everything back in its place, or else he wouldn't be kind. Xiaoyong responded that he hadn't changed at all and was still picking on the weaker ones. However, Xiaoyong had no intention of returning the items. As a paying customer, he wasn't about to back down. "Is this how you treat customers?" he asked. Yang Tao immediately demanded Xiaoyong pay for the goods right there, and then, threatening that if he didn't, things would get worse. An hour later, all the cashiers had finally totaled the items, 56,000. Yang Tao wasted no time, demanding the payment. Without hesitation, our hero used his credit card like a tool of power. The transaction was completed successfully, leaving the security chief stunned. Just as Yang Tao was about to leave, ready to let the matter go, Xiaoyong called him to wait. Xiaoyong wasn't about to let it slide. He wanted an apology for Yang Tao's rude behavior, or he'd return everything. The security chief thought it was unnecessary, but with so many witnesses around, he knew better than to ignore it. Everyone had seen everything unfold and was fully on Xiaoyong's side. They filmed the incident, threatening to make Yang Tao infamous on the internet unless he apologized. Xiaoyong even promised that if the apology was genuine, he'd buy 10 times the amount of goods. If Yang Tao didn't believe him, he could bring over the POS machine, and Xiaoyong would show him his account balance. When Yang Tao saw 7 million, his disbelief was evident. Xiaoyong only wanted an apology before he continued his shopping spree. Although the security chief struggled with his pride, the pressure was overwhelming, and he gave in, apologizing. As Xiaoyong walked past, he gave Yang Tao a piece of advice. Think before you act next time. You never know how things will turn out. Yang Tao, now trying to act friendly, asked why Xiaoyong was buying so much. Xiaoyong dismissed him, saying it was none of his business and that he had big plans ahead. Yang Tao, seeing a business opportunity, offered his help. The supermarket didn't have enough stock for such a big deal, but he knew a wholesaler, Zhang Xina, who had shifted to the wholesale business. Yang Tao immediately contacted him, excited to introduce Xiaoyong as a potential big client. Xiaoyong quickly realized that some people just never change. Since Yang Tao and Zhang Xina were still working together, he could only imagine how much they were exploiting the supermarket. Soon enough, they arrived at the wholesale warehouse, and an expensive car pulled up. From the way Zhang Xina drove, Xiaoyong knew this guy probably had never been deceived, and it was time to teach him a lesson. Although the arrogant Zhang Xina didn't immediately recognize him, Yang Tao reminded him they were schoolmates. After a moment of thinking, Zhang Xina finally remembered. He recalled Xiaoyong as the guy who had a bit of a backbone back in school. Zhang Xina immediately judged him based on his cheap, non-designer clothes. He despised people who tried to act rich when they weren't. Turning to Yang Tao, Zhang Shina began criticizing him for bringing such an unworthy client. He even kicked Yang Tao in the rear, scolding him for wasting his time. Despite Yang Tao's attempts to explain, Zhang Shina was convinced that Xiaoyong couldn't possibly be rich. He had been in business long enough to spot who had money and who didn't. Xiaoyong, tired of the arrogance, called Zhang Shina an ignorant person who looked down on others. Enraged, Zhang Shina grabbed him and demanded he take back what he said. Xiaoyong wasn't scared at all and repeated his words, calling him ignorant. To his surprise, it wasn't the insult about being looked down on that upset Zhang Shina, but the accusation of being illiterate. It turned out that this arrogant man was far too sensitive about his lack of education. Yang Tao, seeing things escalating, stepped in quickly, warning Xiaoyong to be careful not to provoke Zhang Shina further. Don't push him. He's really sensitive about being called illiterate. But for his trouble, Yang Tao received another kick and more insults, this time from Zhang Shina, who was furious that he couldn't do as he pleased. Zhang Shina faced our protagonist with an ultimatum. Either Xiaoyong would purchase a massive shipment of goods, or he'd be forced to leave crawling on all fours. Xiaoyong didn't seem fazed by the threat. He calmly instructed Zhang Shina to release his grip and requested the account details. Moments later, Zhang Shina's furious expression turned into shock as he realized Xiaoyong had deposited $1 million into his account. Xiaoyong explained that this was just an initial payment. He intended to purchase $5 million worth of goods. Zhang Shina asked about the specific items Xiaoyong needed. Xiaoyong listed basics like oil, rice, salt, snacks, and beverages, goods that had long shelf lives. A sly smile appeared on Zhang Shina's face. He had just received a batch of near-expired products, and this was the perfect chance to unload them onto Xiaoyong. When they arrived at the warehouse, Zhang Shina offered the entire stock at a 10% discount off the original price. The deal seemed too good to be true, and Xiaoyong immediately suspected something was off. Before agreeing, he decided to inspect the quality of the goods. True to his suspicions, it was a setup. Although the packaging looked fresh, the products were nearing their expiration dates. Zhang Shina hadn't expected Xiaoyong to catch on so quickly, so he immediately offered a 50% discount. But Xiaoyong wasn't satisfied. He was willing to spend his $5 million, but he expected top-quality goods. However, he had a different plan for these near-expired items. Xiaoyong told Zhang Shina he'd take the expired goods off his hands for half the price, with one condition. He would pay in a month. Zhang Shina was taken aback, but Xiaoyong quickly assured him that he'd use his house as collateral. Zhang Shina was confused, not understanding why Xiaoyong would want expired food. He didn't realize that in the near future, these items would become a highly valuable resource. Xiaoyong didn't explain further and simply instructed Zhang Shina to deliver the goods to the designated address. Just then, Xiaoyong received a call about a house sale. He quickly bid farewell to Zhang Shina and Yang Tao, heading off. The buyer was an elderly man who offered a $400,000 down payment and 3 months for Xiaoyong to vacate. The deal seemed almost too smooth, making Xiaoyong a little suspicious. He asked the old man why he was in such a rush. The man explained that his granddaughter needed to move for school, and Xiaoyong was the only one selling a property in the area. The old man was so upfront, even providing all the details willingly. Xiaoyong asked if he wasn't worried about the price being raised. The old man, realizing his slip, started pleading with Xiaoyong not to take advantage of him, as this was all his life savings. Xiaoyong, not one to exploit a genuine person, assured the old man that their deal was set and signed a contract. The old man was overjoyed, grateful that his granddaughter had a home, and even apologized for distracting Xiaoyong from his work. As Xiaoyong observed the old man's kindness, he felt concerned. He didn't think the man and his granddaughter would survive the apocalypse for long. Before the man left, Xiaoyong asked for his address. Later, Xiaoyong visited his property, where construction was progressing steadily. He checked with the foreman, who confirmed that nearly 80% of the work was done. The walls and doors were reinforced just as Xiaoyong had requested, and the warehouse was ready for use. Excited by the progress, Xiaoyong immediately contacted Zhang Shina to expedite the delivery of the supplies. The warehouse, which looked more like an underground bunker, began filling up quickly. By evening, everything was in place under Xiaoyong's meticulous supervision. Once the workers departed, Xiaoyong took a moment to inspect the work. Everything was on track, and he could finally relax. At that moment, the system sent a notification congratulating him for completing the task, earning him 20 system points. When he opened the system store, he found a new item available, abilities that could be awakened before the apocalypse. Without hesitation, Xiaoyong bought a box. Upon opening it, he unlocked a level 1 ability called Mind's Eye, which allowed him to detect hostility from others. Feeling satisfied with his new power, Xiaoyong knew this would be invaluable in the early days of the apocalypse. Just as he began to unwind, the system sent him another task: gather weapons. Lots of them. Xiaoyong wasn't fazed. Arming himself was exactly what he had planned. It was time to get ready for the coming chaos. Xiaoyong found himself at the heart of the city's late-night black market, ready to procure the weapons he needed. As he wandered through the bustling market, the constant noise of bargaining and the relentless chatter of customers and sellers filled the air. Everywhere he looked, there were hustlers trying to make a quick buck. Out of the corner of his eye, something caught his attention. Someone familiar. It was a man he had seen before during the first disaster, Li Shuxiong. He was aggressively negotiating the price of some fake jewelry, wearing down the seller until he agreed to a much lower price. Xiaoyong hadn't expected to run into this guy tonight, but it made sense that he would be here haggling over fake jewelry. It wasn't surprising that Shui Jing had been fooled by these worthless trinkets. After a few more steps, Xiaoyong finally came across a stall that piqued his interest. Lined up in front of him were various blades, each one sharper than the last. A grin slowly spread across his face as he examined the weapons. He had finally found what he was looking for. Squatting down in front of the stall, he asked boldly if they had anything tougher. The man behind the counter, dressed in military camouflage, didn't seem to get the hint. In response, he tossed Xiaoyong a knife sharpener, suggesting he sharpen the blades himself if he wanted something tougher. Unfazed, Xiaoyong insisted that none of these knives were up to par. He needed something stronger. Realizing the implication, the vendor's demeanor shifted, his tone turning serious as he asked if Xiaoyong was looking for trouble. Just then, the sound of a phone notification interrupted the tension. Xiaoyong had just transferred 200,000 yuan to the seller's account. Holding up the receipt, he made it clear he was serious. The seller's attitude flipped instantly as he acknowledged the transfer and reassured Xiaoyong that he was indeed a serious buyer. The seller quickly called one of his men to watch over the stall while he took Xiaoyong to a more private location for the transaction. They entered an innocuous building nearby, where the seller started pitching some homemade guns. They were small, intended for target practice, priced at 2,000 with cheap ammo. Xiaoyong turned him down immediately, which seemed to ignite a competitive spark in the seller. He then showed off some replica revolvers modeled after military handguns. For 5,000, Xiaoyong could get a 9mm gun, with bullets costing 5 each. Though Xiaoyong found the offer acceptable, he had already prepaid 200,000, so these options didn't interest him much. Curious about the prepayment, the seller asked what it meant. Xiaoyong explained that the earlier transfer was just a 10% deposit for a larger order worth 2 million. The seller, now a bit wary, questioned the young man's background. Xiaoyong quickly made up a story about how his subordinates usually handled these types of shady transactions, but he had come in person and didn't appreciate being questioned about his identity. Realizing that Xiaoyong must be involved in something serious, the seller urged him to wait as he hurried off to a different room. He locked the door behind him and scanned the area through the window. Turning back to Xiaoyong, he assured him he had come to the right person and that they would proceed with the deal at midnight the day after tomorrow. He insisted on cash payment only. When Xiaoyong finally left the building, the seller treated him like a VIP. However, as fate would have it, he bumped into the same familiar face from earlier in the night market. Li Shuxiong couldn't help but comment on the coincidence. Now, it made sense why Xiaoyong had been spending so much. Li Shuxiong also suspected that Xiaoyong's involvement with Shui Jing had something to do with it. He figured the kid had recently picked up too many tips about finances and was now planning to sell everything and live a life of comfort. Zhang Xiaoyong paid no mind to the ramblings of the fatty, whose words were nothing more than empty noise. He figured it would be more practical to test out his newly unlocked ability. As he opened his mind's eye, a faint aura shimmered in his gaze. Above Mr. Cam's head, a symbol of happiness floated, while an angry one appeared above Li Shuxiong. This power was definitely proving to be useful. To test it further, Xiaoyong decided to speak out loud, mocking the fatty for buying cheap, secondhand items just to deceive Shui Jing. He also pointed out that the girl was nothing more than his secondhand trash, just like the rest of the junk he was trying to pass off. The comment made the fatty's anger indicator turn even darker as he fired back with curses, clearly irritated by the jab. Watching the situation escalate, Mr. Cam, eager to keep things under control, asked Xiaoyong if the irate, overweight man was bothering him. With a subtle nod, he labeled Li Shuxiong as an enemy, a clear message. Mr. Cam quickly reassured his new important client that his staff would deal with the matter and teach the fatty a lesson. Xiaoyong didn't mind but advised them not to go too far, since he still had plans for him in the future. As the group of muscular thugs approached the overweight man, his bravado disappeared. He stammered, his usual arrogance replaced with fear. Mr. Cam didn't waste any more time with the man. With a swift motion, he pulled out a baton, and the men quickly took care of the fatty, leaving him bruised and battered on the dark road. His white suit was now covered in shoe prints, and his face showed the evidence of a hard beating. The incident only deepened the fatty's hatred for Xiaoyong. 2 days later, the agreed-upon meeting was set at a warehouse, and both parties were punctual. In front of Xiaoyong, a truck full of suspicious crates awaited, exactly what he was hoping for. When his firearm arrived, signaling the success of his task, the system rewarded him with 10 points, bringing his total to 20. He eagerly opened the crates, revealing an arsenal of weapons, heavy rifles, pistols, and all the necessary gear. Then, unexpectedly, the system added a bonus, a +2 physical enhancement potion. Xiaoyong was pleasantly surprised by this bonus, especially since it was double the strength of the potions in the system store. Not wasting a moment, he injected the potion into his veins. He had expected a brief pinch, but the surge of power was far more intense than he anticipated. The pain was sharp and immediate as the enhancement spread through his body. With his physical score now boosted by 2 points, Xiaoyong felt 40% stronger than before. Determined to make the most of this newfound strength, Xiaoyong checked out the system store once more and noticed another physical enhancement potion. Seeing the value of increasing his strength even more, he decided to take the plunge. After injecting the second potion, his physical score shot up to 8, making him 60% stronger than the average person. Excited to put his new power to the test, Xiaoyong looked around the warehouse and spotted some thick iron bars that were scattered about. He grabbed one, a sturdy bar used in construction, and threw it into the air. With a powerful kick, he bent the rod significantly, sending it flying into the nearby wall with enough force to create a noticeable dent. His kick had been so powerful that it left a visible impression on the wall. With this level of strength, Xiaoyong felt confident that he could handle anything, even the early stages of an apocalypse. As for the weapons, he knew better than to leave them exposed. Storing them safely in his spatial ring was the wisest move. With a simple gesture, he pointed the magical ring at the contents of the truck, and the weapons were absorbed into the ring instantly. The day after tomorrow, the apocalypse was set to begin. Time was running out, and Xiaoyong still had a few things to wrap up. However, he couldn't shake the image of the old man who had tried to buy his house. The old man had offered what little savings he had to secure a future for his granddaughter. Xiaoyong had been through countless battles and betrayals during the first apocalypse, but he'd never ignored the needs of the less fortunate. The least he could do was send some supplies to the old man and his granddaughter as a small token of repayment. The following day, Xiaoyong found himself at a shabby apartment building located in a rundown area of another city. The building was in such bad condition that without a GPS, it would have been impossible to find. The old man had been renting in such a low-cost, dilapidated place, and without an elevator, it was clear he wasn't well off. His apartment was located on the top floor. Xiaoyong knocked on the door, but then quickly realized he should probably remove the supplies from his storage ring, or explaining them would be difficult. Activating the ring, he watched as box after box of essential supplies materialized, filling the hallway with provisions. At that moment, the old man reached the door and opened it, expecting it to be the landlord. He quickly assumed the young man was here to collect the rent, promising to pay next week. But when he took a closer look, he realized it was Mr. Zhang. Behind him, boxes were piled up, filling the hallway and stretching up the stairs, making the old man even more confused. Xiaoyong told him to wait until later for the full explanation, but for now, they needed to get the boxes inside before anyone noticed. After a few minutes of lifting, most of which Xiaoyong did on his own, they managed to get everything in. The old man couldn't believe how easily the young man handled it, not even looking tired. Meanwhile, Xiaoyong was checking the space, trying to figure out if it could serve as a safe shelter. He decided it would do, especially since the front door was sturdy enough. Once everything was inside, Xiaoyong turned to the old man, urging him to pay close attention. He explained that the supplies they brought needed to be rationed carefully because they were meant to last for about 6 months, starting tomorrow. Just as he was about to go into more detail, something caught his eye. a photo hanging on the wall. It was of the proud old man with a beautiful young woman, his granddaughter. To his surprise, the woman in the picture was none other than Shan, a close friend from his past during the first apocalypse. Xiaoyong immediately asked the old man if the girl in the picture was named Shan. This puzzled the old man further, as he hadn't mentioned her name to the young man before. Xiaoyong's expression grew serious, and he quickly asked where Shan was now. The old man explained that she was still at school while they were finishing up the house paperwork. Xiaoyong remembered how Shan had once regretted dragging her grandfather into the chaos during the early days of the first apocalypse. He recalled how her grandfather had risked everything to save her. In that doomed timeline, the old man had fought his way through a zombie-infested school to save Shan, only to die in the process. As someone who had been close to the old man in his past life, Xiaoyong promised himself he wouldn't let that happen again. Turning to the old man, he declared that the house was no longer for sale. The old man panicked, thinking Mr. Zhang was backing out of the deal. But Xiaoyong gave him a chilling piece of news. The world would soon descend into chaos, and the house, along with Shan's school, wouldn't matter. The only thing that mattered now was getting Shan to safety. This sudden declaration only confused the old man further. Xiaoyong realized he couldn't explain everything in detail right now, so he decided to simplify things. He urged the old man to imagine the horrors of a famine. While it sounded terrifying, the old man couldn't grasp how this applied to their situation. Seeing that words weren't enough, Xiaoyong decided to show him instead. With a simple gesture, he made all the supply boxes disappear, sucked into his storage ring in an instant. The room, once crowded with boxes, was now completely empty. The old man stared, dumbfounded. There was no other word for it. Magic. Xiaoyong calmly explained that he had special powers and could see the future. If the old man wanted to survive and save Shan, he needed to listen carefully and follow his lead. Their next task was to get Shan out of her school. As they drove there at full speed, the old man was still trying to process everything, his mouth open in disbelief. Xiaoyong drove like a man on a mission, ignoring all traffic rules in his haste to get there. When they arrived, they found Shan surrounded by a group of students near one of the school buildings. She was being bullied by a couple of jealous girls. One slapped her across the face, while another kicked her in the stomach for daring to speak out. The situation was escalating, but the old man was too focused on reaching his granddaughter to notice the growing tension. As he ran toward Shan, the bullies shifted their attention to him. He yelled at them to stop hurting his granddaughter, but their attitude only grew more aggressive. A group of thugs stood in his way, showing their weapons and telling him to back off and let the girls handle things. Without hesitation, the old man charged forward, yelling at the young men for being heartless bullies. One of the thugs raised a steel bat and aimed it at the old man's head. It would have been a serious blow if it hit, but Xiaoyong reacted quickly, stepping in to stop the attack. He glanced at the thug with disdain, realizing that the younger generation still had a lot to learn about bullying. The other two thugs thought Xiaoyong was Shan's older brother and tried to threaten him, but Xiaoyong was ready. With a swift movement, he delivered a powerful kick to one of the thugs, knocking the wind out of him. The thug crumpled to the ground, unable to continue his attack. The thug was sent flying through the air as though he had been shot out of a cannon. Watching his comrade get tossed around like that, the remaining two thugs hesitated. Xiaoyong clearly knew his way around a fight. Maybe if they teamed up, they could land a blow. But judging by the cold, calculating look in his eyes, it seemed unlikely. One thug approached from the front, armed with a knife, while the other snuck up from behind with a bat. It wasn't the most brilliant plan, but it was all they had. The first move came from the one with the bat, swinging it wildly. Xiaoyong, sensing the attack, easily dodged by ducking low. His enhanced body was already proving its worth. Thanks to the potions he'd taken to boost his physical abilities, his reflexes were on another level. He grabbed the thug, swinging the bat by the collar, as effortlessly as if he were grabbing a misbehaving child. With a swift motion, he slammed the thug into the ground, the impact knocking him out cold. A hard fall to the concrete must have done the trick. Seeing his partner go down, the remaining thug rushed at Xiaoyong, knife in hand. Xiaoyong didn't even flinch as he deflected the weapon, locking eyes with the blonde thug in a chilling stare. With no hesitation, Xiaoyong prepared for another strike, kicking the thug on the side of his leg. The power behind the kick was enough to send him crumpling to the ground, his face meeting the pavement with a loud thud. In mere moments, the two wannabe tough guys were out of the picture. Now, Xiao Yang's focus shifted to the witches taunting Shan Shan for no reason. After surviving the brutal first apocalypse, Xiao Yang had adopted a mantra of equal rights, equal fights. So without warning, he slapped one of the witches across the face. The slap was forceful, sending a shiver through her and leaving her cheek red and stinging. As for the other witch, who had been pulling Shan Shan's hair, Xiao Yang decided she needed a taste of her own medicine. He didn't release his grip, no matter how much she begged. With a fierce glare, he drew the knife from the fallen thug and pressed it to her neck. Terrified, the witch's eyes widened with fear, and the next sound that rang out was a sharp slash, followed by a gut-wrenching scream. Xiao Yang didn't even flinch. During the first apocalypse, he had done whatever it took to survive, and those instincts still guided him. The witch, now trembling, watched in shock as her friend collapsed to the ground, seemingly defeated and powerless. Don't worry, our protagonist isn't all that brutal. Well, not yet at least. When faced with a bully, he didn't resort to anything too extreme. Instead, he just gave her a little haircut. Yep, right there in front of everyone, humiliating her completely. Did she learn her lesson? Not a chance. The bully, furious and teary-eyed, screamed that she wouldn't let Xiao Yang get away with it. But he didn't even flinch at her empty threats. With an air of dominance, he glared at her crumpled figure on the ground, sprinkling the freshly cut locks over her head like confetti, a final touch of maximum disrespect. While everyone else stood around, baffled by his actions, Xiao Yang calmly told her he'd done her a favor. According to him, long hair would only become a burden soon enough. Cryptic, right? The crowd didn't get it, but he seemed to know exactly what he was talking about. Turning to Shan Shan, Xiao Yang shifted gears quickly, telling her they had to leave. Now. Where to? Even he didn't seem sure, but there wasn't much time to waste. Shan Shan's grandpa, on the other hand, wasn't confused at all. He practically shoved his granddaughter into Xiao Yang's car, muttering something about her not going back to school anymore. The old man had a wild look in his eyes as he explained his reasoning. A massive famine is coming, he declared, and survival has to be our top priority. Shan Shan, understandably, thought her grandpa had lost it. She was convinced he'd fallen for some scam call or hoax. As they bickered in the back seat, Xiao Yang just watched, amused but relieved to see Shan Shan safe. Finally, though, he spoke up, revealing the real reason for the urgency. The famine story was a lie. He'd made it up to simplify things for the old man. What was really coming? Something much worse. Something catastrophic. The apocalypse? Yep, you heard that right. He wasn't sugarcoating it anymore. He explained that in just a few days, modern civilization, as they knew it, would come to an end. Shan Shan was skeptical at first. Who wouldn't be? But before she could argue, Xiao Yang suggested she check her phone. You'll see the first signs of it now, he said calmly. And sure enough, the news confirmed it. A video popped up on Shan Shan's screen, showing absolute chaos at a crowded train station. A man was being restrained by authorities, screaming some eerily prophetic words about a strange, toxic smog. What made it worse? He was biting people. Some thought it was rabies, but his lucidity suggested otherwise. Things spiraled out of control fast. The man broke free, attacking more people, and the scene turned into an outright nightmare. Xiao Yang's chilling words rang true. This was only the beginning. The first signs are already here, he said. Tomorrow will officially mark day one of the apocalypse. He explained that a mysterious toxic smog would begin spreading across several provinces, including Province B. The effects would be devastating: mutations, madness, and worse. A significant portion of the population would turn into mindless zombies, driven only by a hunger for flesh. And for the lucky ones who survived the smog, their fate wouldn't be much kinder. For Shan Shan, the idea of zombies wasn't new. She'd seen them in movies, TV shows, and pop culture. But this wasn't fiction anymore. Still, it was hard to grasp the reality of it all. Yet when the chaos erupted, whether tomorrow, next week, or the week after, there'd be no room for disbelief. On their journey back to headquarters, time was everything. But luck wasn't on their side. Traffic was backed up for miles. Even the emergency lane, usually a safe bet for getting through quickly, was jammed. Cars weren't moving, and the group's frustration was growing. The old man, already nervous, couldn't stop thinking about what Mr. Zhang had mentioned earlier: the zombies. Now, stuck in a sea of stationary vehicles, his anxiety spiked. Xiao Yang tried to reassure him, saying they were safe for now. But even Xiao Yang couldn't dismiss the possibility of a small outbreak nearby. The situation worsened when a luxury car came speeding down the emergency lane. The driver, reckless and arrogant, seemed determined to bypass the chaos. As traffic inched forward, the car swerved sharply, trying to cut into Xiaoyong's lane. The move was sudden, almost causing a collision. Xiaoyong slammed on the brakes just in time, narrowly avoiding a crash. The driver, oblivious to the danger, seemed entitled to the space. Furious, Xiaoyong held his ground, refusing to let the car through. But the driver wasn't backing down. Pulling up beside Xiaoyong's window, he hurled insults and curses, acting as if he were the victim. The old man advised Xiaoyong to let it go, pointing out that the driver was likely wealthy and powerful. But Xiaoyong wasn't one to be intimidated. If this guy wanted trouble, Xiaoyong was ready to give it to him. For nearly an hour, they sat in that miserable traffic jam. When it finally cleared, they hoped the ordeal was over. It wasn't. The same luxury car was now behind them, tailgating aggressively. The driver wasn't just reckless, he was vengeful. This was no ordinary road rage. The car sped up, weaving dangerously close, attempting to provoke Xiaoyong. The old man pleaded with him to avoid escalating the situation. But Xiaoyong had had enough. The apocalypse was coming. Why tolerate scumbags anymore? Xiaoyong decided to play along, taunting the driver. He bet on the rich brat losing his nerve, and he was right. In a moment of recklessness, the luxury car swerved wildly, nearly crashing into a hill. Yet even after almost wrecking, the driver refused to take responsibility. Instead, he called the traffic police, demanding surveillance footage to track Xiaoyong down. As the night deepened, the trio finally arrived at their destination, the headquarters. By now, the city was cloaked in darkness. Stepping out of the car, they were greeted by the fortress, an imposing structure that seemed to loom over them. The old man stared in awe, his mouth agape, overwhelmed by the sheer scale and detail of the compound. Shan, standing beside him, remarked that it all felt like overkill, a fortress too grand for what they might need. Xiaoyong, calm and composed, told them to rest up. Tomorrow, he hinted cryptically, everything you know will change. The world is entering hardcore mode. Next morning arrived, and Shan woke feeling better than she had in ages. No alarms, no classes, just the rare luxury of a peaceful morning. As she stretched and looked around, she noticed Xiaoyong nearby, already up and ready for the day. Realizing that this was the perfect moment for exploration, Shan suggested a tour, and Xiaoyong obliged, inviting Grandpa to join them. The fortress tour began with Xiaoyong explaining the sheer strength of the compound. The walls were made of reinforced concrete, thick and unyielding. The gates, crafted from solid steel 3 centimeters thick, were remote-controlled and impenetrable without heavy weaponry. The design made it clear. This was a fortress built for survival, ready to keep out both the living and the undead. However, Xiaoyong laid down a strict rule. No one else, under any circumstances, could enter the fortress without his explicit permission. This didn't sit well with Shan. She couldn't help but question the morality of leaving other survivors outside, vulnerable to the undead. But Xiaoyong didn't argue. Instead, he led them to a different section of the compound, a fenced area with scattered shipping containers. This, Xiaoyong explained, was a buffer zone. If survivors managed to find their way here, they could use this area as temporary shelter. However, access to the main fortress remained strictly off-limits without his approval. He stressed that compassion, while noble, could be dangerous. In the chaos of the apocalypse, human nature would become unpredictable, and the risks of betrayal or exploitation were too high. Even the old man, initially skeptical, nodded in agreement as the harsh truth sank in. Next, Xiaoyong led them to the food storage facility. When they entered, they were greeted by rows upon rows of supplies, stacked high and organized meticulously. It was an overwhelming sight, more provisions than they could have imagined. Xiaoyong took a moment to activate his mind's eye ability, scanning the room to check their hostility status. To his relief, both Grandpa and Shan displayed happy, trusting expressions, a clear indication that they could be relied upon. As the tour continued, Xiaoyong revealed the fortress's weapons cache. He handed Shan a sleek crossbow and gave Grandpa a sturdy shotgun, emphasizing the importance of keeping these weapons secure. In this new world, losing control of their armaments could lead to chaos. Never let these fall into the wrong hands, Xiaoyong warned, the seriousness in his voice leaving no room for doubt. Xiaoyong had just finished showing Shan and Grandpa around the fortress when a notification flashed before him, a new system task. It was another mission, and this one hit close to home. He was tasked with reuniting with an old comrade. Jiangqi, the name, brought back memories and a mix of emotions, but what surprised him most was the timing. Standing on the viewing deck, he noticed a glowing arrow pointing toward the city, marking Jiangqi's location. This was a fortunate coincidence. Xiaoyong had already planned to track down his former allies, and now the system seemed to reward him for his intentions. Wasting no time, he turned to Shan and Grandpa, reinforcing the fortress rules one last time. They were to stay vigilant and not break any of the guidelines no matter what. When asked where he was heading, Xiaorong simply replied, recruiting and building the team. With that, he hopped into his car and drove off, following the glowing arrow toward Jiangqi's location. The arrow led him to a KTV bar, a lively spot with music, laughter, and the distinct chaos of people escaping the world's reality through drinks and songs. Inside, the atmosphere was jovial, with groups of friends enjoying their night. Among them was Jiangqi, his signature silver hair shining even under the dim neon lights. He was laughing, drinking, and singing karaoke with his friends, seemingly untouched by the turmoil outside. Jiangqi and one of his friends stumbled out of the room to find a restroom, their steps unsteady and their laughter loud. After handling their business, the two drunkenly wandered back into the hallway. That's when it happened. In his inebriated state, Jiangqi accidentally bumped into a girl. It was a harmless brush, nothing serious, but the girl's irritated expression told a different story. Jiangqi quickly apologized and tried to move on. Unfortunately, the girl's escort wasn't as forgiving. The man, a towering figure with an intimidating aura, saw this as a personal affront. Without hesitation, he called Jiangqi a punk and delivered a brutal kick that sent him sprawling into the wall. Jiangqi hit the ground hard, the pain evident in his groans. His friend, though clearly scared, didn't hesitate to check on him. But seeing Jiangqi in pain sparked something brave, or perhaps reckless, in the friend. Standing up, he yelled at the thug, calling out his aggression. This boldness only made things worse. The thug, unaccustomed to being challenged, became enraged. Grabbing Jiangqi's friend by the collar, he effortlessly lifted him off the ground, showcasing his brute strength. Jiangqi, despite his pain, tried to intervene. Struggling to his feet, he pleaded with the thug to let his friend go, admitting fault and apologizing profusely. The scene was escalating fast, with the tension palpable to everyone nearby. Amid the chaos, a KTV staff member appeared, drawn by the noise. He wasn't in the best shape, recently recovering from stomach flu only to catch a cold, but his sense of duty prevailed. Bar fights were nothing new in his line of work, and he knew the drill. Approaching cautiously, he tried to mediate, asking both parties to calm down and de-escalate. But the thug wasn't having it. He turned his fury on the staff member, interpreting his interference as disrespect. To make matters worse, he loudly demanded that the bar's owner come out immediately, threatening to shut the place down if his demands weren't met. The staff member, though clearly nervous, gestured discreetly to Jiangqi and his friend, urging them to leave while the thug's attention was diverted. The two young men fled. Back in karaoke room 3090, Jiangqi and his friend barged in, panting and wide-eyed, as if they'd barely escaped a predator. Their other friends, mid-song and confused, turned to ask what had happened. The duo quickly explained, recounting how they had bumped into a drunken thug in the hallway, leading to threats and a near beating. They expressed gratitude for the quick-witted staffer who had stepped in to defuse the situation, even if only temporarily. One of their friends, the hot-headed Chen Chong, wasn't having it. He stood up, declaring that their mechanical engineering class had a reputation to uphold and shouldn't back down from anyone. He even suggested rallying other students from their department to teach the thugs a lesson. Jiangqi, however, stopped him in his tracks. Acting tough and seeking revenge, he argued, was a foolish move with less than a year until graduation. They didn't need trouble. They needed to keep their heads down and focus on their celebration. Reluctantly, Chen Chong sat back down, and the group decided to resume their singing and dancing, trying to salvage the night. But trouble wasn't done with them yet. Moments later, the drunk thug and his gang burst into the room. Their arrival was loud and violent, with the thug dragging the battered KTV staffer by the collar before throwing him onto the floor like a rag doll. The sight of the injured staffer silenced the room, and a chill ran through the group of college boys. The thug, his eyes scanning the room, pointed directly at Jiangqi and his friends. "Grab them," he barked at his crew. His henchmen moved swiftly, closing in on the group, Fear paralyzed the students, who didn't dare resist. They had seen what the thugs were capable of and didn't want to escalate things further. Chun Chong, however, wasn't about to go down quietly. He taunted the gang, daring them to let him make a single phone call, implying he had backup of his own. This only enraged the thug further. Grabbing a full whiskey bottle, the thug smashed it against Chun Chong's head. The impact was brutal, sending a mix of blood and whiskey streaming down Chun Chong's face as he collapsed to the floor. Zhang Qi watched in horror, his mind racing. Outside the KTV bar, help was arriving, but he didn't know it yet. Xiaoyong had just pulled up, stepping out of his car with a calm smile. The glowing system notification had guided him here, and the sight of the lively bar amused him. A KTV bar was exactly the kind of place he expected college-age Zhang Qi to frequent, even during the apocalypse. Inside, chaos continued. Chun Chong, despite his injuries, showed remarkable resilience. Grabbing a nearby metal ashtray, he tried to fight back. His guts impressed even the thugs, but his defiance irritated them more. The gang quickly subdued him, and the head thug delivered another savage blow with a fresh bottle. Blood splattered as Chun Chong slumped to the floor, groaning in pain. But Zhang Qi wasn't one to back down. Ignoring the armed thugs surrounding them, he charged at the head thug, determined to stand up for his friend. Glasses, the ever-loyal companion, joined in to support him. Their bravery was admirable, but the odds were overwhelming. 2 college students against a gang of thugs was a recipe for disaster. The remaining friend in the group, the cowardly dude, was trembling in fear, unwilling to join the fray. Amidst the chaos, something even more terrifying began to unfold. The injured KTV staff member, lying in a heap on the floor, suddenly began to stir. His movements were jerky and unnatural, his groans becoming guttural snarls. His skin paled, and his veins darkened. A horrifying transformation was taking place. The staffer's body started mutating rapidly, his mind succumbing to insanity as he lost all traces of humanity. In mere moments, he became a rabid zombie. With terrifying speed, he lunged at the nearest thug, sinking his teeth into the man's back like a predator attacking its prey. The bitten thug yelped in shock and pain, trying to shake the zombie off. At first, he thought it was just some deranged dog-like behavior. But the creature's bite was unrelenting, and its strength was unnatural. Another thug rushed to pull the zombie off his friend, but the creature was too strong. In a swift motion, it let go of its first victim and latched onto the second thug's arm, biting down with alarming ferocity. The room erupted into screams as panic spread among the gangsters and students alike. Zhang Qi and Glasses tried to hold their ground, even as fear gripped their classmates. The cowardly friend was now trembling uncontrollably, nearly fainting from terror. The situation looked bleak. The zombie's attacks were relentless, and its enhanced physical strength made it nearly impossible to overpower. If this continued, everyone in the room was at risk of falling victim to the infected staffer. Zhang Xiaoyong had arrived. Without hesitation, he grabbed the rabid zombie by the back of its neck and effortlessly lifted it off the ground with a single arm. The sheer strength he displayed stunned everyone in the room. Xiaoyong carried the struggling zombie to the nearest glass wall and smashed it into the pane, shattering it completely. Glass shards rained down as the zombie slumped momentarily, dazed from the impact. Xiaoyong turned back to the room, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Everyone, stop! The thugs, the students, and even the terrified Zhang Qi froze. Xiaoyong's cold demeanor and the ease with which he had handled the rabid zombie commanded instant respect and fear. The thugs, who had struggled with the creature in pairs, realized this newcomer was no ordinary man. However, the head thug wasn't ready to back down. Misreading the situation, he directed his anger toward Xiaoyong, still thinking he was the top dog. Ignoring the thug entirely, Xiaoyong turned to Zhang Qi. "Were you bitten?" he asked, his tone firm. Zhang Qi, still reeling from the chaos, stammered, "And no, I wasn't bitten." The confusion was evident on his face, as neither he nor anyone else in the room truly understood what was happening. Without wasting time on further explanations, Xiaoyong simply ordered Zhang Qi, his comrade from a past life, to follow him. For reasons Zhang Qi couldn't quite explain, he felt an unshakable compulsion to comply. However, as he moved to follow, the head thug stepped in his way, still clinging to the delusion that he was in control. Before another fight could erupt, one of the bitten gangsters began coughing violently. His voice was hoarse, and he groaned about a splitting headache and dizziness. Xiaoyong's sharp eyes scanned him, catching the unmistakable early signs of mutation. The thug exhibited every classic symptom: relentless coughing, extreme dizziness, and that ominous bite wound festering on his shoulder. Even the thug's offhand comment about having a runny nose earlier in the day confirmed Xiaoyong's suspicions. Yep, he's bitten, Xiaoyong muttered to himself, watching as the rot visibly spread from the infected wound. The proximity of the bite to the nervous system was accelerating the process. The man didn't have much time left before he'd turn into a full-blown zombie. They couldn't afford to deal with two rabid zombies in such a confined space. Still holding the first rabid zombie by the neck with one hand, Xiaoyong made his move. He began dragging the thrashing creature across the room, his strength leaving everyone dumbfounded. "What the hell is he doing?" someone muttered, their voice trembling. Without explaining himself, Xiaoyong hauled the zombie to the restroom door. He yanked it open, shoved the undead creature inside, and slammed the sliding door shut in one fluid motion. The rabid zombie immediately started pounding on the door, snarling and clawing with feral rage. The sound sent shivers through the room. Everyone stared at Xiaoyong, their faces a mix of shock and confusion. What kind of person could casually wrangle a zombie like that? Xiaoyong dusted off his hands, his expression darkening. The immediate threat was contained, but his focus now shifted back to the living threats in the room. His gaze locked onto Zhang Qi, who was still frozen in disbelief. "Which one of these thugs do I need to deal with first?" Xiaoyong asked, his voice sharp and unwavering. Zhang Qi blinked, his brain struggling to catch up. The question confused him even more. Who was this guy? Why was he so protective of him? They didn't even know each other. Meanwhile, the head thug, his pride now in tatters, decided he'd had enough. "You're dead, punk," he roared, charging at Xiaoyong with a wild swing. Xiaoyong didn't even flinch. His expression was one of pure boredom, as if he were dealing with a pesky mosquito. Before the thug's fist could connect, Xiaoyong moved like lightning, grabbing the man's face with one hand. His fingers dug into the thug's skin as he pushed forward, smashing him face first into the glass table in the center of the room. The table shattered with a deafening crash, sending shards flying everywhere. The head thug crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain, his bravado completely shattered. But the chaos wasn't over. One of the other bitten gangsters, his face pale and sweaty, staggered forward in a fit of rage. "You're gonna pay for that," he screamed, lunging at Xiaoyong. Xiaoyong adjusted his stance, his movements calm and precise. In one swift motion, he delivered a sharp blow to the man's windpipe. The thug collapsed instantly, his breath choking out as he fell flat on his back. As his comrades rushed to his side, panic set in. The thug started convulsing violently, foam spilling from his mouth as his body jerked uncontrollably. His eyes rolled back, and his skin began to turn an eerie gray. The infection had reached its final stage. The man was turning right before their eyes, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Xiaoyong stepped forward, flexing his fists. "Anyone else want to test their luck?" he asked, his voice calm yet menacing. Turning to Zhang Qi, Xiaoyong gave a firm command. "Take your friends and get out of here. Now!" Zhang Qi didn't hesitate. He and his classmates helped the injured Chen Cheng to his feet, lending their shoulders to support him. Together, they stumbled out of the room as fast as they could, grateful to escape the nightmare. The gangsters, now desperate to retreat, tried to follow suit. They carried their wounded comrades, who were showing increasingly alarming symptoms of infection. But as they reached the door, Xiaoyong blocked their path. "You're not going anywhere," he said coldly, his presence towering over them like a storm cloud. The head thug, still nursing his injuries, tried one last act of defiance. "You think you can stop us?" he spat, his voice shaky yet defiant. The gangsters cowered under his gaze, their drunken bravado long gone. For the first time in their lives, they realized they weren't the top dogs they thought they were. Xiaoyong didn't bother responding. He shoved the thug back effortlessly, sending him sprawling to the ground once again. The gangster's bruised ego couldn't take it. He scrambled up and started pounding on the door as Xiaoyong stepped outside, slamming it shut behind him. "Come back here, you coward! I'll skin you alive!" the head thug screamed, banging on the locked door in a blind rage. But his tirade was cut short by a guttural growl behind him. One of his bitten men had succumbed to the infection. The thug turned just in time to see the bloodshot, crimson eyes of his now rabid friend lunging at him with terrifying speed. The infected thug tackled his boss, tearing into him with feral hunger. The room erupted into chaos as the other gangsters tried to fight off their former friend, but it was too late. The infection spread quickly, and soon the room devolved into carnage. The rabid attendant locked in the bathroom had figured out how to open doors, banging and rattling the handle as if determined to join the madness. Outside, Xiaoyong stood silently, holding the door handle firmly to keep anyone from escaping. Muffled screams and the sound of tearing flesh echoed from the other side, sending chills down the spine of anyone who could hear. A hesitant KTV employee approached him, curiosity mixed with fear. What's going on in there? Xiaoyong didn't waste time. Get the keys and lock this door now. Don't let anyone in or out. Call the police and paramedics. Tell them it's a rabies flu outbreak. The employee stared at him, frozen in shock. Move! Now! Xiaoyong snapped, his voice sharp. The urgency snapped the worker out of his daze. He ran to grab the keys, returning to lock the doors securely from the outside. The eerie, inhuman noises coming from the room made the employees shiver. One of them, too curious for their own good, hurried to the security room to check the live footage from the KTV cameras. What they saw made their blood run cold. The screen showed a grotesque scene of rabid figures feasting on their dead comrades. Blood splattered the walls, and the head thug's girlfriend, previously full of life, was now being torn apart by the monsters. Her lifeless eyes stared blankly as the infected devoured her. The security team immediately called the authorities, their hands trembling as they reported the horrors unfolding in their establishment. Meanwhile, Xiaoyong led Zhang Qi and his friends out of the building. This area isn't safe anymore, Xiaoyong said, his tone firm. You need to leave now. Still shaken, the college boys didn't argue. They followed him to his car, helping the injured Chun Chong inside. As Xiaoyong drove them away, Zhang Qi finally broke the silence. Thanks for helping us back there, he said hesitantly. But who are you? Why did you step in? Xiaoyong glanced at him, said, I was hired to protect you by someone who wants to stay anonymous. The explanation made sense, at least enough for the moment. The coward boy nervously asked, that rabies flu, it's real, isn't it? I thought it was just a hoax. Xiaoyong's expression darkened. What do you think you saw back there? Those weren't drunken fights or wild animals. It's real, and it's just the beginning. Glasses gulped, his voice trembling. Is there any cure? A vaccine? No, Xiaoyong said bluntly. There's no cure, no medicine, and no way to stop it. It's already started, and it's only going to get worse. If you want to survive, you'll listen to everything I say from now on. Got it? As they drove through the streets, Xiaoyong's point was further proven when they saw an infected man chasing a terrified pedestrian on the side of the road. The chaos hadn't completely consumed the city yet, but the outbreak was spreading rapidly. Soon, there would be no safe place left. In the back seat, Xiaoyong's mind wandered to a darker memory. In their past life, one of Zhang Qi's dorm mates had betrayed him, leading to the deaths of countless people at the hands of zombies. Zhang Qi was the only one who barely survived, but the betrayal scarred him deeply. Xiaoyong's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, scanning the faces of the college boys sitting behind him. One of them had been the traitor. The question was which one? On the other side of town, Kajing was on a phone call with the man she affectionately called Honey. She had been feeling unusually anxious lately. The witch was promised some much-needed supplies, but things in her neighborhood had started to spiral out of control. Too scared to step out herself, she relied on his assurances that he'd deliver the goods as soon as he could. Just as she was about to press him for details, a sudden knock at the door startled her, nearly causing her heart to leap out of her chest. She hung up immediately, her breath shaky as she cautiously approached the door. Peeking through the peephole, she exhaled in relief. It was her friend Xiaoya. Kajing quickly unlocked the door to let her in. Even as they exchanged greetings, a lingering unease hung in the air. Earlier that day, an elderly man named Liu, who lived on the building's first floor, had been taken away by both the police and an ambulance. Though the incident was hushed up, Kajing had heard the commotion from her apartment that morning. The two witches began to piece together what was happening around them. It was hard to dismiss the growing evidence that the rabies flu news wasn't just media fearmongering. As for Li Shuang's promised delivery of supplies, it was still nowhere to be seen. Xiaoya had warned Kajing that greasy Li couldn't be trusted, but they both knew he had his uses. If nothing else, he could be their pawn in a plan they'd just cooked up. The idea was simple: ransack Zhang Xiaoyong's secret stockpile. The stockpile, they'd learned, was massive, enough to make anyone rich in the middle of this escalating epidemic. Xiaoya had already tried, and failed, to seduce Xiaoyong, getting herself kicked out in the process. Not one to give up, she had one of her devoted followers spy on him. That's how she discovered trucks regularly unloading supplies at an abandoned factory he'd refurbished. Clearly, Xiaoyong had known about the epidemic long before the news broke. The two witches decided it was time to act. They'd use Li Shuang to get into Xiaoyong's fortress and take a share of his hoarded riches by force. Meanwhile, Xiaoyong had just returned to his base camp without any trouble. As his car rolled into the compound, it was hard not to be impressed by what he had built in such a short time. Jiangqi, one of his companions, was visibly amazed. Fortress seemed a more fitting term than base camp. Xiaoyong smiled at Jiangqi's reaction. It was the same awe everyone felt the first time they saw it. The sound of their arrival stirred the camp's residents, who emerged with weapons at the ready. Once they recognized Xiaoyong, relief washed over their faces. Grandpa Shan and his granddaughter, Shan Shan, were particularly glad to see him return safely. Xiaoyong reassured them he was fine and introduced his companions. He knew Jiangqi well, but simply referred to the others as Jiangqi's classmates. Grandpa Shan and Shan Shan welcomed the newcomers warmly, assuring them they were now in a safe place. Xiaoyong quickly assigned Grandpa Shan to take the group on a tour of the fortress, explaining the rules and regulations. Glasses, one of the newcomers, couldn't help but feel like they'd walked into a military base. Before they could even start the tour, Yiming, another new arrival, timidly spoke up. He asked if they could be given weapons to help defend the fortress. Xiaoyong shot him a sharp look, suspicion flickering in his eyes. They had barely been there an hour, and this guy was already asking to be armed? That was suspicious. Glasses whispered to Yiming, urging him to tone down his eagerness. They were newcomers, after all. Trust had to be earned first. To calm the situation, Xiaoyong promised that weapons would be issued to everyone in a few days. For now, their priority was to get Qin Chang's head injury treated. His condition was severe, so the medical room was their next stop. After a few hours, the boys finally managed to shake off the tension and the lingering smell of booze after their life-or-death ordeal. Yiming, ever the annoyance, turned to Glasses with a grumble. "Why'd you stop me earlier?" he asked. "If you hadn't, we'd probably have guns by now." The audacity of this guy. Yiming's little speech about needing protection in their current situation would have been funny if it weren't so irritating. Without weapons, he compared staying in the fortress to being under house arrest. Thankfully, Glasses had enough sense to be grateful for being saved from the infected, instead of stirring up unnecessary trouble. But Yiming wasn't done. He kept sowing seeds of distrust among his classmates, questioning Xiaoyong's story. Hired by an anonymous client for protection? Yiming scoffed. That doesn't even make sense. He gritted his teeth and brought up Qin Chang's treatment too. While Xiaoyong had promised to monitor Qin's condition, Yiming found the medical room's high security suspicious. That's when Yiming dropped his most ridiculous theory yet. He claimed Xiaoyong might be planning to harvest Qin's organs in secret. It was absurd, but Yiming seemed determined to recruit others to his cause. His plan? Strike first against their so-called savior. Glasses immediately shot down the idea. Betraying Xiaoyong, the man who had saved their lives, was out of the question. But Yiming wasn't backing down. "I'd rather betray the world than let the world betray me," he said, trying to sound dramatic. His ultimate goal was to take over the fortress and claim control of the area. Yiming even had the gall to suggest capturing Grandpa Shan and Shan Shan if Xiaoyong ever left. He didn't stop there. He made a disgusting comment about Shan Shan being cute and hinted at his twisted intentions. The boys stared at him with utter disgust. Realizing his plan was going nowhere, Yiming waved it off with a laugh. "Relax, I was just joking," he said. Jiangqi, naive as ever, took the excuse at face value, but Glasses wasn't buying it. The apocalypse hadn't even hit its full swing, and Yiming was already scheming like a villain. Glasses pointed out the obvious. If Xiaoyong really wanted to harvest their organs, they'd already be locked up and helpless by now. As the group left the showers, Yiming silently wrote them off as not worthy of his grand plans. He was convinced that, in times of chaos, only the ruthless survive. Yet, deep down, everyone knew Yiming was just a coward who trembled at the sight of blood. Even during the fight with the gangsters earlier, he'd done nothing but cower. While Yiming brooded over his rejected schemes, Grandpa Shan gave Xiaoyong an update. Jiangqi and the others had started settling in, and Qin Chang was on the mend. As instructed, all doors and windows had been secured. Xiaoyong thanked Grandpa Shan and Shan Shan for their hard work, urging them to rest up. Before they left, Xiaoyong gave them a quiet warning. Keep an eye on Jiangxi's classmates, he said. I'm sensing some traitorous vibes. In the dead of night, Xiaoyong headed straight to his warehouse to take care of some business. He opened the system's item shop and carefully inspected the offerings. With a few clicks, he redeemed the Level 1 Apocalypse Farmer box for 2 points, the Level 1 Food Supply box for 5 points, and the Level 1 Armed Deterrent Supply box for another 5 points. This left him with 8 points remaining. The rewards were as practical as they were impressive. The Apocalypse Farmer box provided 50 corn seeds, ensuring a potential food source for the long term. The Food Supply box delivered an impressive haul: 200 kilograms of starch sausage, 100 kilograms of pre-cooked braised pork with preserved vegetables, and 50 boxes of pickled cabbage noodles. Meanwhile, the Armed Deterrent box contained 1,500 rounds of 9mm ammunition, a crucial asset for defense. Xiaoyong piled the rewards together and couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment at the sheer size of the haul. In an apocalypse where resources would soon become scarce, supplies like these were priceless. It wasn't the same as having money to spend freely, but in this grim reality, this was worth far more than cash. The next morning, the tranquility of the fortress was shattered by the arrival of multiple vehicles pulling up to the gate. Armed men carrying blades poured out of the cars, their movements brisk and purposeful. A man in a suit, clearly in charge, ended his phone call and barked orders at his crew. "Break down the gate," he yelled. The group, nicknamed the Stupid Army for good reason, began bashing the steel gates with bats and kicking them with all their might. After several minutes of futile effort, the men complained loudly about the gate's thickness. "This thing's too strong. We can't break it with this junk," one of them shouted. Furious, Mr. Suit ordered his men to bring out their big guns. However, instead of explosives or heavy weaponry, the crates they carried contained something much less impressive: wine bottles. The gang quickly turned these into Molotov cocktails, lighting them up and hurling them over the gates. The fiery bottles landed clumsily, mostly setting small fires in the yard rather than hitting any valuable targets. Even so, the bright flames caused quite a stir. A few managed to land on the roof of the outer apartment complex, drawing attention from those inside. Shanshan, Jiangxi, and the others sprang into action, grabbing fire extinguishers and buckets of water to contain the blaze. Thankfully, Xiaoyong had already warned them about the likelihood of attacks like this. Though the larger disaster hadn't yet unfolded, situations like these were becoming all too common. While the younger group dealt with the fires, Xiaoyong and Grandpa Shan emerged from the warehouse. Armed with an assault rifle and a shotgun, respectively, they climbed up to the watchtower for a better view of the chaos outside. Once at the top, Grandpa Shan peered at the scene below and squinted in recognition. "That guy in the suit, doesn't he look familiar? Pretty sure he's the one who had that road rage incident with us on the highway a few days ago," he said. One of the thugs on the ground spotted the two figures standing on the watchtower and pointed them out to Mr. Suit. "Boss, there he is. That's the guy from the road." Mr. Suit's anger exploded. Recognizing Xiaoyong, he screamed obscenities, his voice carrying loud and clear to the watchtower. "You little punk, you got some nerve. Get your ass down here, or I'll burn this place to the ground." Xiaoyong, calm and composed, replied coldly, "You've got 5 minutes to get off my property. If you're still here after that, you won't like what happens next." The gangsters were enraged. To them, Xiaoyong's warning was nothing more than a brat's empty threat. Instead of backing down, they doubled down on their efforts, hauling out 2 more crates of Molotov cocktails to negotiate their way in. Suddenly, Xiaoyong's system sent him a new task. While Grandpa Shan was stressing over whether they should fire a warning shot, Xiaoyong was busy reading the mission details. The task was straightforward: eliminate the threats as quickly as possible for a reward of 10 points. The generous reward quickly dispelled any notion of firing warning shots. These intruders were no innocent bystanders. They were criminal gangsters causing chaos even before society had fully broken down. Their reckless use of Molotov cocktails could have easily burned someone alive. Xiaoyong believed that leaving scum like this alive during the apocalypse would only lead to more harm for innocent people. With that thought in mind, he made his decision. No warnings, no mercy. He steadied his aim and pulled the trigger. The first bullet tore into Mr. Suit's arm, stunning him into silence and causing him to clutch his now severed limb. The man's agonized screams filled the air, and the thugs quickly realized they had picked the wrong fight. From the watchtower, Xiaoyong remained calm on the outside, though he silently cursed himself for missing the kill shot. His aim had grown rusty after living a peaceful life for so long. However, he wasn't about to let that stop him. The thugs, panicked by the sight of the assault rifle, scattered and dove for cover behind their vehicles. Leading the retreat was none other than their injured boss, Mr. Suit. But Xiaoyong wasn't one to let his targets escape. With a grim determination, he began picking off the retreating thugs, one by one. They had rained fire on his property, so he returned the favor with lead, aiming for their chests, heads, and anything else in his line of sight. It was a brutal slaughter. Mr. Suit, driven by pure adrenaline, managed to reach one of the vehicles and scramble inside. Ignoring the bleeding stump that used to be his arm, he screamed at the driver to get them out of there immediately. Grandpa Shan, watching from the tower, cast a worried glance at the escaping car. But Xiaoyong showed no concern. This was why he had grabbed the automatic rifle from the armory. Taking careful aim, he tracked the vehicle's movements and unleashed a relentless barrage of high-caliber bullets. Magazine after magazine, Xiaoyong emptied his load, each shot finding its mark. Grandpa Shan observed in awe. The young man's fluid movements, aiming, firing, reloading, were a sight to behold. Even during his years of military service, Grandpa Shan had never seen such precision and efficiency. When Xiaoyong was finally done, silence returned to the area around the fortress. The fire set by the Molotov cocktails had been extinguished, and the road leading to the gate was littered with the bodies of thugs. The getaway vehicle, riddled with bullets, had broken down entirely. Everyone inside was lifeless, their escape attempt cut short. Without missing a beat, Xiaoyong turned to Grandpa Shan. "Call Jiangqi and the others," he said. "Have them come out and clean up the mess at the front door." But as he watched the scene below, a new idea formed in his mind. It was still the early days of the apocalypse, and this incident could be used to their advantage. Instead of disposing of the bodies, he could allow them to mutate into zombies. This would create practical combat scenarios to help Jiangqi and Shanshan develop their fighting skills. With a faint smirk, Xiaoyong revised his instructions. On second thought, leave them where they are. We'll use this for something more productive later. Grandpa Shan nodded, understanding the young man's forward-thinking approach. The corpses lying in the middle of the road would serve as tools in preparing for the harsher days ahead. Not far from the fortress, another group of cars and vans approached, closing in steadily. Inside one of the white cars, Li Shuxiong impatiently asked if they were close to the site. Xiaoya, seated beside him, answered with her usual cutesy, playful tone, cheerfully assuring him they'd arrive after the next intersection. In the back seat, Kajing was growing increasingly irritated by Xiaoya's act. To her, it was obvious that Xiaoya was putting on this performance to keep Li Shuxiong, her gangster sugar daddy, entertained. Kajing, being no stranger to manipulation, could easily see through another schemer's moves. When they finally pulled up to the outskirts of the fortress, Kajing turned to Li Shuxiong and told him to wait while she and Xiaoya went ahead to investigate. The moment Kajing stepped out of the car, she tried to drag Xiaoya into her scheme, insisting that Xiaoya was the only one who knew the exact location of Xiaoyong's supposed factory. Xiaoya, however, didn't want to get involved. Pointing out the obvious, she claimed it was the building directly ahead, adding that it was impossible to miss. She also complained that her shoes weren't suitable for walking long distances. But Kajing wasn't taking no for an answer. Ignoring Xiaoya's protests, even her request to grab her phone, Kajing physically dragged her out of the car. Reluctantly, Xiaoya followed, though she silently fumed at being forced into this mess. Back in the car, Li Shuxiong called his crew to action. "Get ready to move at a moment's notice," he ordered. He planned to lead the charge, with the vans packed full of young thugs and veteran gangsters following close behind. As they walked toward the fortress, Xiaoya whispered her frustrations to Kajing, making it clear she didn't want to be dragged into whatever chaos was about to unfold. But Kajing, ever suspicious, saw through Xiaoya's reluctance. She assumed Xiaoya was making a play for her gangster sugar daddy, Li Shuxiong. The truth was far more calculating. Xiaoya had no interest in Shuxiong. She had dressed up and played her part in hopes of catching the attention of Xiaoyong. After all, Kajing's involvement with Shuxiong had already compromised her in Xiaoyong's eyes. As they approached the gate, the women finally noticed the grisly scene ahead. The road leading to the fortress was littered with corpses riddled with bullet wounds. Xiaoya froze in fear, urging Kajing to turn back. Judging by the dried blood, it was clear the bodies had been there for some time. Kajing, however, was undeterred. She guessed that the bodies belonged to two rival groups who had fought over Xiaoyong's supplies. With hardened criminals lying dead in the aftermath, she assumed that Xiaoyong, the supposed loser, must have been caught in the crossfire. But even if he hadn't survived, the supplies were all that mattered. Xiaoya tried to reason with her, suggesting they let Li Shuxiong and his boys handle the situation. But Kajing insisted on sneaking closer to check if the factory gates were locked. What the women didn't know was that the gangster corpses had already begun mutating, the virus in their systems activating post-mortem. Oblivious to the danger, the two women pressed on toward the gates. Standing in front of the massive steel barrier, Xiaoya pointed out that there was no visible way to open it. The gates were sealed tight, and even the interior compound was obscured from view. That, at least, gave her some relief, as it suggested Xiaoyong might still be safe and secure. Their scheming was interrupted when a voice called out from the outpost near the entrance. Shanshan, armed with a crossbow, stood guard. Putting on a tough front, she demanded to know who they were and how they'd found the fortress. Xiaoya quickly adopted a friendly tone, pretending to be an old acquaintance. She told Shanshan that the two of them were friends of Xiaoyong. Kajing, always bold, went a step further, claiming to be Xiaoyong's girlfriend. Shanshan, unimpressed, turned back toward the compound to inform Xiaoyong of the two witches outside, one of whom was making wild claims about being his girlfriend. As soon as Shanshan was out of earshot, Kajing began venting her frustration. She accused Xiaoyong of ditching her for a younger woman, clearly referring to Shanshan. Xiaoya, more pragmatic, warned Kajing to keep her emotions in check. Shanshan had a crossbow and wasn't afraid to use it. The women's confidence, however, lay in their belief that Li Shuxiong and his armed gang could pull off the heist. As far as they were concerned, all they needed to do was open the gates and let the chaos unfold. When Xiaoyong arrived at the watchtower and laid eyes on the two women, two of the most troublesome figures from his past, his anger was barely contained. Secretly activating his mind's eye, he appraised their status. Sure enough, their outward friendliness was nothing but a facade. Both women were seething with hidden negative emotions, each trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage. Xiaoya wasted no time putting on her performance, claiming they had come to check on Xiaoyong out of concern. She painted a picture of chaos and worry, trying to appeal to his pity. But Xiaoyong, having learned his lesson from past experiences, wasn't falling for it. With a cold smirk, he called their bluff. "So," he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "what kind of weapons did you bring with you this time?" The scheming duo, Kajing and Xiaoya, stood frozen in place. Their plans had been completely unraveled before they even stepped into the fortress. To make matters worse, Xiaoyong decided to teach them a lesson right then and there. From the watchtower, he opened fire, raining bullets onto the spot where they stood. Panicked, the two women screamed and danced around, dodging the shots. They shouted at him, calling him crazy for being so reckless. But Xiaoyong, standing tall and calm, emptied his magazine without hesitation. Xiaoya was terrified of the firearm and tried to appeal for a calmer, less hostile resolution. Kajing, however, doubled down, treating Xiaoyong as the weak, spineless fool she always thought he was. They couldn't have been more wrong. Killing them outright would have been too easy for Xiaoyong. Instead, he had something far darker and more gruesome in mind, a punishment that would match the malice in their hearts. That's when the groans started. From behind the women, the corpses of the gangster thugs began to stir. One by one, they reanimated, their bodies twisted and ravenous. This was the rabies flu, or so people still called it in the early days of the outbreak. Xiaoyong watched the scene from his perch, completely unfazed. The transformation of the gangsters into zombies wasn't just a terrifying spectacle, it was poetic justice. Leading the pack of the undead was none other than the cowardly Mr. Suit, still clinging to his twisted sense of importance even in death. As the zombies lurched forward, their ravenous hunger driving them, the two women finally realized what was happening. The first three zombies lunged with terrifying speed, desperate to sink their teeth into fresh flesh. The women screamed and started running, barely avoiding the snapping jaws and clawing hands of the undead. Frantic and breathless, they screamed for help, their cries reaching the ears of Li Shuxiong, still sitting in his car nearby. He glanced out the window and saw the horrifying sight of zombies chasing the women. Fear gripped him immediately. Without hesitation, Shuxiong barked orders at his men. "Turn around! Get us out of here!" His gang obeyed instantly, their vehicles screeching as they sped away, leaving the women behind to fend for themselves. Kajing, panicked and desperate, was slowing down. She wasn't fast, and the zombies were closing in. But she wasn't about to go down without trying something underhanded. With no hesitation, she threw her purse forward, aiming for Xiaoya, the faster runner. The purse's strap caught around Xiaoya's ankle, tripping her. Xiaoya fell face first onto the pavement, injuring herself badly. She barely had time to recover before the zombies pounced on her. Their teeth tore into her flesh as she screamed in agony. Blood splattered everywhere as they devoured her, their hunger insatiable. Xiaoya's cries turned into gurgles of rage and betrayal. In her final moments, her bloodshot eyes locked onto Kajing, who had deliberately sacrificed her. But Kajing didn't stop to look back. Instead, she kept running, muttering to herself that Xiaoya deserved it. Her callousness knew no bounds. From the watchtower, Xiaoyong observed the entire scene, his expression cold and detached. As Xiaoya met her grisly end, the system in his mind chimed, awarding him 10 more points for eliminating a threat. Meanwhile, Shan Shan, standing nearby, was horrified. She had never seen zombies before, and the sight of the dead gangsters reanimating into flesh-hungry monsters was almost too much for her to handle. Xiaoyong, still calm, explained the situation to her. "This is the true beginning," he said. "The air is filled with infectious alien particles now. Anyone exposed to the outdoors for too long, especially the dead or weak, will mutate quickly." He wasn't interested in watching the chaos unfold any longer. Turning his focus inward, he decided it was time to regroup and prepare for what was coming. Summoning everyone in the fortress, Xiaoyong called an urgent meeting. Once everyone was gathered, he laid out his plan. "For the next 2 days, we need to stay indoors," he said firmly. "Seal the windows and doors. Don't go outside for any reason. This will give our bodies time to gradually adapt to the infection, reducing the risk of mutation." Hearing this, Jiangxi brought up a critical concern. "What about Brother Chong? He's still unconscious in the urgent care room." The mention of Chong shifted the mood. While his head wound had improved thanks to basic medical care, he still hadn't regained consciousness. Worse, his condition was deteriorating. It was clear that the infection was spreading rapidly through his body. Even though his subconscious fought back against the mutation, the virus was relentless. His veins bulged visibly, the infection coursing through them like wildfire. The city had descended into utter chaos. Violence and pandemonium filled the streets. Some people were trying to escape, some were losing control, and others were eating each other. An old man, hiding in his home and peeking through the window, muttered to himself, "It's complete madness out there." He had a plan. As soon as night fell, he would head to a warehouse to gather supplies for his family. Until then, he warned his wife and child to never open the door for anyone except him. But just then, someone started banging on the door. The loud, successive knocks sent a wave of tension through the room. The family froze, wondering what, or who, could be on the other side. The man gestured to his wife and child to stay silent. Grabbing a golf club from his kit, he cautiously approached the door to check the situation. A voice called out, "Brother Jay." Hearing this, the old man sighed in relief. It was his old buddy, Yang Tao, or so he thought. Jay began to pull the handle to let his friend in. But before he could, the visitors forced their way in with a powerful kick that sent Jay flying across the room. His frail body hit the wall with a thud. What he believed to be a friend was far worse, far more dangerous than even the zombies outside. A gang of furious thugs surrounded him, their anger palpable. The poor guy didn't even get a chance to grab his golf club before his face was slammed against the cold floor. As his former colleagues loomed over him, he desperately tried to meet Yang Tao's eyes, hoping to appeal to whatever goodwill might be left. He reminded Yang Tao of how well he had been treated in the organization, but Yang Tao wasn't buying it. To him, Jay had always been an arrogant boss who saw Yang Tao as nothing more than a disposable lackey. Sure, Yang Tao had made decent money, enough to put a down payment on a house, but Jay? He earned enough to buy entire neighborhoods. But this wasn't about the past, it was about business. The thugs weren't here to chat. They wanted the warehouse keys and an address. Jay's defiance was starting to test their patience. Seeing his stubbornness, Yang Tao made his way toward Jay's wife and child. Without hesitation, he grabbed the wife by her hair, forcing Jay to watch in horror. The little boy, driven by pure instinct, charged at Yang Tao to protect his mother. But the size difference was too great. All the child could do was sink his teeth into the thug's arm, his face soaked with tears of fear. It didn't work. Yang Tao retaliated with a sharp slap that sent the boy reeling. Watching his family suffer, Jay's anger boiled over. He shouted at Yang Tao, demanding he come after him instead. Yang Tao, however, remained calm. He promised no further harm would come to the mother and child if Jay cooperated and led them to the warehouse. Left with no choice, Jay complied, and the group set off, dragging him along as their hostage. They soon arrived at the warehouse. The mechanical door creaked open, revealing only a few scattered supply boxes, a far cry from the treasure trove the thugs had expected. It turned out that most of the stock had already been sold, even the nearly expired food, to a big client. Hearing the name Zhang Xiaoyong, their wealthy buyer, sparked a new idea in Yang Tao's mind. Why stop here? They could raid Zhang Xiaoyong's factory and claim his massive stockpile of supplies for themselves. If they succeeded, they'd be set for life. Brother Jay had strongly advised against such a reckless plan. During his routine deliveries, he had accidentally spotted a young man carrying a gun. This led him to suspect that Xiaoyong had somehow learned about the looming disaster beforehand. Yang Tao, however, remained calm and unbothered by the mention of guns. To him, it was a matter for Brother Jay to handle, not his concern. The thug's explanation was simple yet chilling. His job was to take Zhang Xiaoyang's supplies in exchange for ensuring the safety of his wife and son. Yang Tao, hearing this, called it a fair trade. But Brother Jay was trapped in a terrible dilemma, torn between saving his family and his moral compass, unsure how to navigate the crisis. Back in Xiaoyang's seemingly impenetrable fortress, the situation was tense yet quieter following repeated failed invasion attempts. The group had assembled in the urgent care area to confront a grim reality. Their biggest problem now lay in the bed before them. Chen Chong, who had succumbed to the infection. After losing consciousness for several days, he had finally woken up, but his mind was gone. His body was alive, but his humanity had been lost. His classmates were devastated. Tears flowed as they mourned their brave and kind friend. Almost everyone was crying. Everyone except Yiming. Unlike the others, Yiming boldly declared that they should kill Chen Chong immediately. His suggestion shocked the group. Xiaoyang turned to look at the defiant young man, while Zhang Qi glared at him with disgust and disappointment. How could you suggest something so cruel? Zhang Qi demanded. But Yiming stood firm. He argued that Chen Chong was already gone. If they didn't put an end to his suffering now, and he somehow broke free, everyone's lives would be at risk. Xiaoyang, known for his pragmatism, agreed with Yiming's cold logic. The chances of recovery were nearly zero. Slowly, he drew his combat knife and unsheathed the blade. But instead of handling the matter himself, Xiaoyang handed the knife to Yiming. You want him gone? Then you do it, Xiaoyang said calmly. Yiming froze, fear spreading across his face. Every fiber of his being resisted the idea of carrying out the execution. Xiaoyang, unimpressed, reminded him of how he had been asking for a weapon since the beginning. Here's your weapon, Xiaoyang said, pushing the knife closer. Use it, but Yiming couldn't bring himself to move. His hands trembled, his courage failing him completely. After a tense moment, Zhang Qi stepped forward. Swallowing his fear, he took the knife from Xiaoyang's hand. I'll do it, Zhang Qi said with determination. He wasn't proud of the decision, but he knew it had to be done. If Yiming was too much of a coward to act, then he would. As he gripped the knife, Zhang Qi hesitated. His mind wrestled with the reality of the situation. Could he really go through with it? Xiaoyang, observing his hesitation, asked calmly, Are you sure? Once you do this, there's no going back. If you're wrong, it makes you a murderer. Zhang Qi clenched his jaw. I trust you, he said to Xiaoyang, his voice firm despite the turmoil in his heart. Xiaoyang smiled faintly, almost as if he had expected this response. He gave Zhang Qi the green light. Zhang Qi approached Chen Chong's bedside, tears streaming down his face. He raised the knife high, aiming for his friend's throat. His hands shook as he prepared to strike. But just as the blade was about to pierce the flesh, Xiaoyang intervened. The knife stopped midair. Zhang Qi, startled and confused, turned to Xiaoyang, desperate for an answer. Why did you stop me? He asked, his voice shaking. The answer was straightforward. The system had given Xiaoyang an intriguing evaluation. For now, he instructed everyone to leave, as they had something extraordinary in their possession, a zombie that still held value. Chen Chong had transformed into a rare mutated variant, a discovery of immense significance. The group left the urgent care unit and went about their tasks within the fortress, leaving only Xiaoyang and the mutated zombie behind. Chen Chong, now a grotesque creature, thrashed violently, desperate to sink his teeth into Xiaoyang's flesh. His bulging veins, dark and foreboding, were enough to haunt anyone's dreams, but not Xiaoyong. Standing face to face with the aggressive mutant, Xiaoyong remained calm, even exhilarated. With a hint of excitement in his voice, he told the creature it had an important mission to fulfill. Outside, the sun was shining, and the clouds were scattered thinly across the sky. Near the fortress on the town's outskirts, a car was swerving uncontrollably, struggling to stay on course. With no other vehicles on the road, the poorly driven car eventually crashed into a lamppost, rendering it useless. Brother Jay stepped out, scratching his head in frustration. His bad luck had cost him a car before reaching his destination. Fortunately, the factory wasn't far, just a short walk away, so he was almost there. However, his calm demeanor quickly shifted to fear when a gang of zombie stragglers attacked, drawn by the noise. Reacting instinctively, Brother Jay foolishly shielded himself with his arm, allowing the zombie to bite deep into his flesh. He pushed the mindless monster away, his left arm bleeding. As the zombie staggered to its feet, Brother Jay ran back to the wrecked car, desperate to find the crowbar he had prepared as a weapon. It might help, but would it be enough? His anger and adrenaline fueled his strength as he swung the crowbar, striking the zombie across the face with a brutal hit. After knocking the eager zombie down, he continued bashing its skull until it stopped moving completely. Dealing with one of these creatures had drained him, and standing exposed while more zombies approached was not a good strategy. He couldn't afford to stay there, so Brother Jay made his way toward the factory, his body shaking uncontrollably. He feared it was the virus spreading inside him from the bite. At the front gate of the fortress, a cluster of stationary zombies awaited their next prey, conserving energy. To avoid the trouble, Xiaoyong quietly opened the side door for the team's mission. Behind him, the rest of the crew, armed with their chosen weapons, followed. Most carried melee weapons, and Shan complained that all the gear strapped to their bodies made movement awkward. Xiaoyong explained that zombies were irrational but powerful, and with their current combat experience, they were likely to get hurt, so the protective gear was necessary. He promised they could remove it once they were more skilled. The team crept along the building, sticking close to the walls to avoid being noticed immediately. As they reached the front, Xiaoyong spotted the first zombie in their path and signaled the team to prepare. Entering the zombie's detection range, it turned toward them, revealing its decaying teeth. With the battle imminent, Xiaoyong reminded his team to remember their training. Always watch each other's backs and maintain a safe distance. As the zombie charged, Xiaoyong demonstrated his impressive evasion technique, dodging its attack effortlessly. He remained calm enough to provide a lesson in the middle of the fight. When a zombie misses its attack, he explained, survivors must take advantage of the moment. Be quick and aim for the temple or the back of the neck. Glasses, however, was the first to act on instinct, ignoring Xiaoyong's advice about targeting the right spots. As he raised his blade, his attack struck with precision. The machete's edge lodged between the zombie's partially split skull. It might have stunned the creature, but hitting the head directly caused the blade to vibrate, sending a sharp pain through his hand. The skull is the hardest part of the head, and using a melee weapon on it only makes the hands go numb, as Glasses had experienced. After a brief stun, the zombie snapped back with renewed aggression, desperately trying to bite into the student's flesh. Thankfully, Glasses had the presence of mind to use his blade defensively, trapping the zombie's teeth on its edge while calling out for help. Xiaoyong commended him for his excellent defense and instructed Zhang Qi to snap out of it and assist his teammate. Zhang Qi, with a calm and determined expression, moved behind the zombie, positioning his bat at the back of its neck. When his wooden bat hit the neck, a sharp cracking sound followed. Xiaoyong was pleased with their first real training results and reminded them that one strike wouldn't be enough, so everyone joined in to finish off the zombie. Once it was down, Zhang Qi eagerly turned to his brother, Xiaoyong, seeking validation for their successful hit. Xiaoyong only smirked as another aggressive zombie appeared, snarling and charging, hungry for human flesh. Zhang Qi's face turned worried, fearing his brother might be sneak attacked by the mindless corpse. But instead of a bite, the group watched as Xiaoyong turn around, grabbing the zombie by the head like a toy. He pushed its mouth away from his body while the zombie struggled helplessly. Xiaoyong reminded everyone to follow his example, always observing their surroundings and never letting their guard down. Zhang Qi took this lesson to heart, while the others were simply amazed by Xiaoyong's proficiency with just his bare hands. Meanwhile, Brother Jay, still fighting through his bite wound, inched closer to the factory gate. From his hiding spot, he could see more mutants wandering the area. He began to wonder if Zhang Xiaoyong had already met his end when he suddenly heard voices near the outer wall. He recognized Xiaoyong's face and moved closer for a better look. Using a van as cover, he peered through and saw Xiaoyong, along with a group of strangers, hunting mutants, crushing their skulls with every blow. However, the desperate gangster failed to notice something lurking beneath the van. It was none other than Xiaoya, or what was left of her. Despite the zombie infection, her heavy makeup hadn't changed her face much. She reached up, grabbing Brother Jay's foot and refusing to let go. Her sudden grip made him stumble, and when he looked down, his eyes widened in terror. Xiaoya's torn mouth opened to emit a guttural roar, her clothes in tatters. It seemed like this might be the end for Brother Jay before he even had a chance to fight back. As he braced for death, a gunshot rang out. Someone had taken pity on him and saved him. It was none other than our hero, Xiaoyong. Now, the zombie Xiaoya was headless, and not just in a metaphorical sense. Her head was physically gone. Brother Jay was left disgusted, throwing the corpse away from him. When Xiaoyong saw Jay, he was surprised to find him there and immediately asked what he was doing in this chaotic situation. Jay, like all of his previous fake friends, didn't rush to explain himself. Instead, he pretended to be pleased to see Xiaoyong alive, even with the madness all around them. But as he got closer, Xiaoyong noticed a bite mark on Jay's arm. In the heat of the moment, Jay didn't realize it, but Xiaoyong pointed it out clearly with the barrel of his automatic rifle, warning him not to come any closer. At that moment, Jay realized his fate was sealed. He wasn't giving up, though. He had one last chance to save his family. Jay begged Xiaoyong not to shoot him yet, and asked for a favor. Xiaoyong agreed to listen, but only on the condition that Jay stayed where he was. This was Jay's last effort to save his family. He was already infected, and soon he would become one of those crazed zombies, but he still had one final request. Yang Tao had kidnapped his wife and son and was using them to blackmail Jay, forcing him to infiltrate Xiaoyong's base and seize all of its resources. Jay admitted that he wasn't a good person, but even he had never done anything as evil as what Yang Tao was doing to his innocent family. He feared for their lives, knowing that if they were left in Tao's hands, their fate would be worse than his own once he turned into a zombie. So, Jay pleaded with Xiaoyong to take care of his family, even though he knew he had only helped him before for his own benefit. Xiaoyong was aware of Jay's greed, but he had to admit that Jay had saved him time in the past. He pondered the right thing to do. The fortress had enough space, and the number of men far outweighed the women. Breaking that balance wouldn't be an issue. Luckily, he didn't have to think long. A notification from the system arrived, offering a new mission called Entrust the Wife and Child. To complete it, Xiaoyong would have to rescue Jay's family, and he would gain more points for this task than for clearing out zombies near the fortress. Without hesitation, Xiaoyong agreed to take care of Jay's family. Jay, overwhelmed with gratitude, couldn't believe Xiaoyong's kindness. He even bowed, saying that he could never repay him in this life, but would serve him faithfully in the next. But Jay had one final request. Xiaoyong pretended not to understand, but it was clear Jay didn't want to turn into one of those monstrous zombies and put his family at risk. He asked Xiaoyong to end his life now. Xiaoyong, however, wasn't in a hurry to act. Unlike Jay, he understood how the apocalyptic world worked. Instead, he told Shan to bring a bicycle from the warehouse for Jay. He advised him to go as far from people as possible to a completely isolated place. Jay didn't understand why Xiaoyong was doing this, but he didn't question it. He didn't have much time left and had no choice but to follow Xiaoyong's instructions. Driven by thoughts of his wife and son, Jay took off on the bicycle, determined to escape the inevitable zombie transformation that was already spreading through his body. Meanwhile, Xiaoyong and his team finished clearing out the zombies near the fortress. They piled them up, drenched them with fuel, and set them on fire. It was a tough day and they were exhausted, but at least now, the zombies would never rise again. Xiaoyong's team was now experienced enough to defeat a zombie in close combat without taking damage. However, when dealing with larger groups, they were still unprepared. Xiaoyong quickly advised his team to head back to the fortress, where he entrusted Shanghua with a critical task, guarding the weapons warehouse. The safety of the fortress would be in Shanghua's hands while Xiaoyong went into the city that night. Shanghua was curious about Xiaoyong's plans. His old friends wanted to accompany him, but Xiaoyong quickly reassured them there was no need. They weren't ready for the dangers of the city, and it was more important to protect the fortress. He had to trust Shanghua to handle the defense. Before leaving, Xiaoyong loaded up on melee and ranged weapons and prepared to buy more supplies from the system store. Unfortunately, it was updating too slowly, and he was frustrated. He manually updated the store, and 3 new supply boxes appeared: Black Tech, Life-Saving, and Armed Deterrent. The Black Tech box was the most expensive, and with the manual update cost increasing to 4 points, Xiaoyong had to be careful. Still, he bought the Black Tech supply box. After opening it, a blinding light filled the car, and Xiaoyong was rewarded with a physical enhancement serum that increased his strength by 5 points. The intense flash made him momentarily disoriented, but once the pain subsided, he realized the value of the serum. With his strength now at 13 points, about 2.6 times stronger than an average person, he was ready for the mission ahead. Back at Jay's home, things were tense. His wife was trying to reassure their son, telling him that his father would take care of everything. But Yang Tao's thugs had grown impatient. They broke into the room, and the terrified wife asked what they were going to do. The answer was clear. Yang Tao was going to have his fun. Sadly, in this apocalyptic world, no one would come to her rescue. That was exactly what Yang Tao was counting on. The story picks up with a terrifying scene. Xiaoli's clothes were being torn apart by a group of thugs, their faces showing not even a hint of shame. Her desperate son struggled, pushing one of them with all his might, trying to protect his mother. Just then Li, the guy with the ponytail, walked in, his eyes scanning the room as he asked what all the noise was about. One of the goons smirked, saying they were just about to have some fun, and even invited Li to join them. But Li wasn't interested. He told them the job wasn't finished yet, and they had no time for distractions. They needed to focus and get it done. Annoyed, one of the thugs grumbled, asking what the big deal was. They'd done this sort of thing plenty of times before. That's when Li's patience wore thin. He shot the thug a sharp look and reminded him exactly who they were dealing with. This wasn't just anyone. It was Zhang Xingji's wife and kid. If she couldn't take it and ended her life, Zhang would have nothing left to lose. And when that happened, he'd come after every single one of them. None of them would make it out alive. Still, Li didn't completely shut him down. He assured the thug that once they took care of Zhang, they could come back and break her spirit however they wanted, not letting her rest for a single day. The thug, though disappointed, called Li a party pooper for ruining the mood. But in the end, he backed off and motioned for the others to leave. One of them threw Xiaoli a chilling look on his way out, taunting her to wait for her turn. Left alone, Xiaoli and her son could do nothing but cry, helpless as night fell. Meanwhile, on the deserted streets outside, our boy was behind the wheel, cruising through the city with a lot on his mind. With 13 points in stamina, he now had more than twice the strength of an average person. His reaction time was sharper, and his control had improved significantly. As he zoomed through the cluttered streets, drifting around corners with precision, he felt the rush of adrenaline coursing through him. But the city center was up ahead, and he knew driving any further would only attract more unwanted attention. It was time to move on foot. Just as he stepped out of the car, a chilling roar echoed through the empty streets. Turning around, he spotted 2 zombies charging straight at him. But he didn't flinch. In a swift move, he dodged their attack and slammed his shoulder into one of them with such force that it knocked the other down as well. Without hesitation, he summoned his sword and charged at the zombies, going full throttle. With a single swing, both of their heads flew off in an instant. These zombies were nothing more than punching bags now, a perfect way for him to test his newfound strength and reflexes. He couldn't help but marvel at how effortlessly he was overpowering them. There was no doubt his physical strength had more than doubled compared to an average person. On top of that, his instincts had sharpened, and with his enhanced hearing, he could tell that his destination was only about 800 meters away. Meanwhile, across town, a group of zombies was relentlessly banging their heads against the glass door of a small grocery store. Inside, a handful of survivors were frantically piling heavy objects against the entrance, hoping it would hold long enough for them to figure a way out. Panic filled the air, and amid the chaos, a terrified brat turned to his father, his voice shaking as he asked if they were going to die here. His father, trying his best to stay calm, reassured him that those sons of witches wouldn't get in. And even if they did, he added with a grim smile, at least they'd be reunited with his mother. Of course, his words did little to comfort the brat, who burst into tears even louder. The officer standing nearby rolled his eyes in frustration. He couldn't believe the nonsense coming out of the father's mouth. What kind of brainless talk was that to give a scared kid? But the father wasn't one to back down. With a smirk, he snapped back, saying if he had enough brains to think things through before speaking, he'd be managing properties by now instead of hiding from zombies. Despite the father's humor, even the officer was beginning to worry. The constant pounding on the door wasn't stopping, and for a moment, it seemed like they really might not make it out alive. Just as the tension reached its peak, a sudden gunshot echoed through the air. One of the zombies clinging to the door had its head blown apart, sending a shockwave through the group. Brat collapsed to the ground in fear, while his father stood frozen, clueless about what just happened. The officer snapped into action, telling them to move the barricade aside and check who was outside, but not to make any noise. Slowly and carefully, they peeked through the narrow gap, only to realize that all the nearby zombies had already been taken care of. Relieved but still cautious, they stepped outside. Brat's eyes widened in shock as he suddenly blurted out something about a mutant. His father, confused, quickly asked what he meant. In a hushed, shaky voice, Brat explained, it wasn't just an ordinary zombie out there. It was stronger, faster, and deadlier. Just like in the comics, novels, and games. The father was getting more and more annoyed with his son, who couldn't stop talking about games, even in the face of danger. Frustrated, he snapped at him, wondering how his son could still be so obsessed with entertainment at a time like this. No wonder his grades were always the worst, father thought bitterly. Don't forget that this father's name is Old Song, so we will be calling him that from now on. The officer, growing impatient, turned to him and told him to cut it out. How were grades even relevant right now? They had bigger things to worry about. He urged them to stay focused and keep an eye on their surroundings. After all, they didn't want that mutant zombie ambushing them out of nowhere. As they moved forward, the officer repeated his warning, reminding them to stay alert. Step by step, they carefully made their way toward the base. Eventually, they reached a fork in the path and came to a stop. That's when Old Song's eyes landed across the street. There stood a young man, clearly focused on something, his hands moving swiftly in the air as if adjusting invisible controls. It was none other than our boy, deep in thought, busy adding points to his system and fine-tuning his stats. Before anyone could think, Old Song's son suddenly screamed in panic, pointing at him and shouting that it was a mutant zombie. But the officer, being the only one with some common sense, quickly assessed the situation. This guy didn't look like a zombie at all. He looked like a survivor. Our boy couldn't help but chuckle at the brat's wild imagination and casually told him to stop jumping to conclusions. The officer, now relieved, stepped forward cautiously and warned our boy that it was too dangerous to be wandering around alone. He suggested that they should stick together if they wanted to survive and invited him to join their group. Curious but cautious, Zhang Xiaorong asked them who they were and why only a few of them were out here. As he scanned the area, the officer explained that they were searching for supplies and mentioned that many civilians were still gathered at Rangxiang Garden. The mention of the place triggered a memory in Zhang's mind. He recalled that Jinu Mansion was nearby, not far from where they stood. Old Song immediately agreed, pointing out that it was just across the street. He then urged Zhang to join them, emphasizing that there was strength in numbers. With Officer Li carrying a gun and their experience dealing with mad zombies, they were confident in their ability to protect him. Of course, they had no clue about our boy's true capabilities. But instead of showing off or bragging about his strength, he simply nodded and agreed to go with them. And with that, they cautiously continued their journey forward, each step taken with care and vigilance. Old Song looked at Zhang Xiaoyang with a curious expression, asking why he wanted to go to Jinu Mansion. He wondered if there was someone important he was trying to find. Zhang Xiaoyang simply replied with a yes, offering no further details. But Old Song wasn't done yet. He pressed on, asking if it was a relative or perhaps a girlfriend. Then, with a somber tone, he reminded Zhang that it was the end of the world, and whoever he was looking for was probably already dead. He advised Zhang to prepare himself mentally for that harsh reality. The officer gritted his teeth and nodded. He admitted that even if they hadn't been killed by the Ravagers, there was still a chance they might have run into those beasts. The mention of beasts caught Xiaoyang's attention, and he immediately asked what he meant by that. Officer Li, who had been listening quietly, stepped in and explained. He revealed that a group of thugs had taken over the Bichue mountain villa area in the eastern part of the city. To survive, they didn't hesitate to harm other survivors. Their group had once encountered them and lost many companions in the process. Officer's face darkened at the memory, and he decided not to dwell on it further, simply reminding everyone to stay vigilant when dealing with other survivors. Suddenly, a sharp voice cut through the tense atmosphere. The brat shouted for the officer to be careful. Spinning around, Officer Lee spotted a zombie lunging straight at him. Without hesitation, he took it down with a few well-placed shots. He stood there panting heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. For a brief moment, he thought it was over. But the relief didn't last long. The sound of gunfire had attracted more zombies, and panic quickly set in. Just then, his eyes landed on an abandoned bus nearby. Without wasting a second, he signaled for everyone to run toward it. Zhang Xiaoyong, however, grinned to himself, thinking a step ahead. Running blindly could attract even more zombies, but the bus, being a closed shelter, offered solid defense. The only downside? If it got surrounded, there would be no way out. He quickly weighed the pros and cons in his mind and decided that the emergency plan deserved a score of 70. By the time he finished his assessment, everyone had already made it into the bus. Officer Lee, still catching his breath, called out to him, urging him to hurry and keep up. Just as the tension reached its peak, Zhang Xiaoyong jumped into the bus, and Officer Lee wasted no time slamming the door shut behind him. With urgency in his voice, the officer warned everyone to stay alert and check each seat for any hidden ravagers. But before anyone could act, the brat shouted, his voice filled with panic, that the zombies weren't giving up. They were still gathering outside. Officer Lee gritted his teeth in frustration. Despite their quick escape, the undead were still on their trail, closing in fast. The bus shook violently as the zombies began banging on it, their relentless attacks growing stronger with each passing second. The officer struggled to keep the doors shut, but it was clear the pressure was becoming too much for him. Just then, Zhang stepped forward and, without hesitation, slammed the door with such force that the zombies were thrown back, and the door sealed shut completely. Officer Lee stood there, stunned, his jaw hanging open in disbelief. The sheer strength Zhang displayed was beyond anything he could have imagined. Without wasting a moment, Zhang came up with a plan. He firmly stated that he'd hold the doors shut, buying them time, while the others should break the windows and fight back. Surprisingly, Officer Lee nodded, deciding to put his trust in Zhang's judgment. Without delay, they shattered the bus windows, and Old Song took the lead, striking down the zombies that tried to cling to the vehicle. The others quickly joined in, making sure Old Song didn't lose his balance while hanging out the window. Meanwhile, Officer Lee held back from using his bullets, carefully counting his remaining rounds. He knew he couldn't afford to waste them and needed to save them for when things got truly desperate. That's when Zhang reached into his bag and pulled out a crossbow, casually handing it to the officer. Lee stared at him in confusion, unable to comprehend how Zhang had just produced the weapon out of nowhere. Zhang simply shrugged and said he'd picked it up earlier, as if it was no big deal. With no time to question further, Old Song and Officer Lee got to work, using the crossbow and their own strength to push back the attacking horde. After what felt like an eternity, they finally managed to clear out the zombies and step out of the bus they had been using as shelter. The brat, now beaming with confidence, puffed out his chest and declared that they had just turned a dangerous situation into a safe one. He was convinced this wasn't mere luck. Surely, they were the chosen ones, the children of fate in this apocalypse. But before his excitement could get out of hand, Zhang firmly reminded everyone to stay cautious and avoid making the same careless mistakes again. Meanwhile, back at the fort, everyone was anxiously hoping that things would go smoothly for Zhang Xiaoyong. Yiming decided to keep watch. Seeing his sudden enthusiasm, the guy with glasses couldn't help but tease him, asking why he was suddenly so dedicated. Annoyed by the remark, Yiming shot back, telling him to stop talking nonsense. He reminded him that he had always been sincere about his duties. The fatty, realizing he might have pushed too far, quickly backed down and asked why Yiming was getting so worked up over a little joke. Despite the lighthearted moment, Grandpa Shan stepped in, deciding that since Yiming was willing to take charge bravely, everyone else should head back to their rooms and rest. They needed to be well prepared to make the most of Yiming's help. Before leaving, he advised Yiming to wake everyone immediately if anything unusual happened. As the night deepened and silence settled over the fort, Yiming sat quietly, realizing how late it had gotten. He knew the others were already fast asleep, but his mind remained focused on his real goal. He was determined to settle things before our boy returned. In the dimly lit room, the old man slept soundly, completely unaware that the key to the weapons room lay just inches from his pillow. Moving with practiced stealth, Lu Yiming quietly opened the door and crept inside. Step by step, he approached the bed, his eyes fixed on the key. Just as his fingers were about to grab it, the old man stirred unexpectedly his voice breaking the silence as he groggily demanded to know what Yiming was doing. But before he could react further, Yiming landed a solid punch to his face, knocking him out cold. Without wasting a second, Yiming snatched the key and bolted out of the room. The old man, groaning in pain, called after him, shouting for the key to be returned. His cries quickly roused the others, and within moments, the entire fort was in an uproar. As the old man frantically explained what had happened, everyone sprang into action, chasing after Yiming. But Yiming was one step ahead. As he ran, he tossed anything he could find in their path. Chairs, boxes, anything to slow them down. Strangely enough, instead of simply jumping over the obstacles, they all stood there as if frozen, like game characters stuck behind an invisible wall in a restricted area. It was almost comical how easily they were stopped. While making his escape, Yiming noticed the nursery room up ahead. Since he was already in this deep, he figured he might as well go all the way. He slipped inside, where Chin Chong, the zombie, was strapped to the bed. As Yiming cautiously approached, the zombie suddenly lashed out with its free hand. Yiming stumbled back in shock, realizing that only one hand was properly restrained. He wondered if the straps had been too loose when they tied the creature down. Oddly enough, instead of feeling worried, Yiming grinned. If the zombie was already partially free, it would save him the trouble of untying it himself. Meanwhile, the others finally made it past the obstacles, but what they found in the corridor was far from pleasant. Frustration was evident on their faces as they realized Yiming had gone out of his way just to let Chin Chong out of the infirmary. The old man couldn't help but regret not realizing sooner what a snake Yiming was. But Shanshan quickly reminded him that there was no point in regretting now. They needed to focus on what to do next. With all their weapons locked in the warehouse, their first priority was to make sure the zombie was secured back in the infirmary. Grandpa Shan decided they should use the method Zhang Xiaoyong had taught them earlier. Stay cautious and avoid letting the monster get too close. With that in mind, they cautiously approached the zombie. In a swift move, Zhang Qi grabbed the creature by the neck, while the other two quickly pinned its hands down. The old man, taking charge, pointed towards the infirmary and told them to drag it back inside. With a quick countdown of 3, they shoved the zombie back into the infirmary and locked the door as securely as possible. Once the door was shut, one of them couldn't help but wonder aloud if restraining the zombie had been easier than expected. Surprisingly, everyone else felt the same way. But before they could dwell on it, the old man brought them back to reality, reminding them that they had wasted too much time. By now, that little brat must have already grabbed all the weapons. And just as he finished speaking, Yiming appeared with a smug look, questioning the old man's audacity to call him a little brat. To make things worse, he now had a gun in his hands. Unfortunately for everyone, the storeroom only had one weapon, which annoyed Li Yiming, but he figured it was enough to deal with them all. Once he was done with them, he could take his time searching for the rest. With the gun pointed straight at them, Li Yiming ordered them to move back into the room. Zhang Qi tried to reason with him, reminding him that it was Zhang Xiaoyong who saved everyone and gave them a chance to survive. But Li Yiming simply sneered, saying that just because he saved them didn't mean they had to serve him like slaves for the rest of their days. The old man, furious, called him an ungrateful fool, but there wasn't much they could do now. Meanwhile, inside the infirmary, Chin Chong seemed to have his own plans. Watching the heated argument unfold outside, it looked like he was about to make his move. But before anything could happen, the scene shifted to Rongxiang Garden. There, Officer Li was giving precise directions to Zhang Xiaoyong, explaining how to reach Jinyu Mansion. He warned that the layout of the residential area was complex, making it an easy hiding spot for zombies. Zhang needed to be extra careful. Officer Li advised him to use the side gate of the community instead of the main gate. It would be safer that way. Zhang nodded, taking the advice to heart, and assured Officer Li that he'd keep it in mind. As he walked towards his next destination, Old Song suggested they should help him out. After all, he had saved their lives by fending off those zombies. But Officer Li wasn't convinced. He reminded Song that they had no idea what was waiting inside Jinyu Mansion. If they accidentally walked into a horde of zombies, it would all be over in an instant. Still concerned, Old Song asked why they were letting Zhang walk straight into what seemed like certain death. Officer Li sighed, saying he had already warned Zhang as much as he could. There was nothing more to do now but feel sorry for him. However, Li also pointed out that Zhang shouldn't be underestimated. His skills were far beyond ordinary. Meanwhile, outside the mansion, zombies roamed everywhere, and inside, The goons holding Jiang Xingji's family hostage were getting impatient. One of them grumbled, annoyed that Jiang hadn't returned yet. But another thug, less concerned, declared that he had held in his frustration long enough. Tonight, he was going to take it all out on Jiang's wife. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to sleep. It was clear that these fools were simply waiting for a dead man to walk through the door. However, one of them, smarter than the rest, pointed out that Jiang might already be dead. After all, he had gone out alone. The disgusting thug shrugged and added that when they finally got their hands on the woman, they'd make sure to tie her up tight, so she wouldn't even have the chance to take her own life. They knew things could go south at any moment, so they were determined to enjoy whatever time they had left. Hearing their vile plans, the woman trembled in fear, helpless against their cruelty. Finally, the man with the ponytail gave the signal, allowing his men to do as they pleased. But he made one thing clear: nothing should happen to her, at least not while they were busy with their dirty games. Just then, something outside caught Ponytail's attention. His eyes narrowed as he noticed something unusual. The zombies, every single one of them, had mysteriously dropped dead. He had no idea what was going on, but we know who did this. Curious, Ponytail decided to check it out, wondering if a rescue team had arrived. But before he could take another step, his life came to an abrupt end. The moment he stepped outside, a dagger slashed through his throat, cutting it clean. His head hit the ground with a dull thud, rolling away lifelessly. Meanwhile, the other thugs in the room were ready to claim their prize. Their faces lit up with twisted excitement as they eagerly undid their belts, their eyes filled with sick anticipation. Xiaoli's son clung to her desperately, but they yanked him away without a second thought. A sharp slap landed across Xiaoli's face, silencing her cries. The kid, despite his fear, refused to back down, his tiny fists clenched, ready to fight with everything he had. But the thugs had no patience for his defiance. They kicked him out of the room, slamming the door shut behind him, leaving him alone outside. Just then, the headless body of Lee, the guy with the ponytail, collapsed to the ground in front of him. The boy stood frozen, his eyes wide in shock. But what stunned him even more was the dark silhouette standing in the doorway. His fear melted away as he realized who it was: Jiang Xiaoyong. Jiang glanced down at the trembling boy and calmly asked if Jiang Shigi is his father. The kid stammered for a moment before nodding, his voice barely escaping his throat. Inside the room, the thugs were already tearing at Xiaoli's clothes as she desperately tried to cover herself. One of them, smug and arrogant, slapped her again, demanding that she scream. But Xiaoli remained silent, refusing to let her son hear her suffering. Frustrated by her resistance, the thug decided to take his turn first before letting the others have their way. Before he could act, the door suddenly slammed open. One of the thugs, thinking it was the brat trying to fight back, scoffed and turned toward the door. But before he could even react, his head was sliced clean off, and he fell silent. His friend, clueless to what had just happened, barked at him to stop standing around like an idiot and throw the kid out again. What he didn't realize was that his buddy was already dead, his lifeless body crashing to the floor with a heavy thud. The remaining thugs stood frozen in confusion, their minds struggling to comprehend what was happening. At that moment, Jiang Xiaoyong seized one of the thugs and slammed him hard against the wall. The thug, who had been happily undoing his belt just seconds ago, stuttered in shock, asking who he was. But Xiaoyong didn't bother to answer. Instead, without hesitation, he delivered a powerful kick straight to the thug's face, knocking him out cold and ending the fight in an instant. Meanwhile, back at the fort, tension filled the air. Li Yiming stood with his gun pointed at everyone, his voice cold and final as he warned them one last time: move, or he would shoot. The old man, seeing no other choice, urged the others to do as the bastard said and step into the room. But Shanshan hesitated, unwilling to comply. The old man, however, insisted she follow orders for now, reminding her that Yiming had the gun and promising to figure something out later. Yiming smirked, his expression full of arrogance and disgust. He told them there was nothing to figure out, no escape, no clever plan. They hadn't even seen his true ruthlessness yet. He was determined to establish his dominance once and for all. Without wasting another second, he decided to take down the old man first, since he was the one talking the most. The two people standing behind the old man desperately tried to talk him out of it, but before they could finish, a sudden noise froze everyone in place. The infirmary door's lock began to rattle. In the next instant, with a loud swing, the door flew open, leaving everyone in shock. To their disbelief, it was Chun Chong. Somehow, Even in his berserk state, he had managed to unlock the door himself. It seemed impossible, ridiculous even, but there he was free, and it was clear he had only one target in mind. His deadly gaze locked onto Yiming like a predator eyeing its prey. Panic washed over Yiming as he quickly raised his gun, determined not to let this monster, who could open locked doors at will, live a second longer. He pulled the trigger without hesitation, but to his horror, the gun jammed. His eyes widened in despair as he realized he was completely screwed. Before he could even react, Ching lunged at him with terrifying speed. In a flash, he tore Yiming apart, ending the reign of the bastard who had kept everyone on edge for so long. But the horror didn't end there. Ching, without a word, dragged Yiming's lifeless body toward the infirmary, leaving everyone speechless. They could only watch in stunned disbelief, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Then, in a chilling move, Ching picked up the key to the infirmary door, tossed it aside, and locked himself inside once again, leaving everyone outside standing in utter bewilderment. Meanwhile, Zhang Xiaoyang had finished dealing with the thugs and finally freed the terrified mother. As she clung to her son protectively, Zhang called the boy over to him. But the mother, holding him close, anxiously asked what Zhang intended to do with him. Without offering any explanation, Zhang simply told the kid to come. After a moment of hesitation, the boy assured his mother that everything would be fine and slowly stepped forward. When he reached Zhang, our boy handed him a dagger and, in a calm yet firm voice, told him to finish off the thugs. The remaining goons, realizing what was coming, dropped to their knees and started begging for their lives. Even the mother, desperate and afraid, pleaded with Zhang, insisting that her son was just a child. But Zhang's response was unwavering. He stated that the boy wasn't just a kid anymore. Everything changed from this moment on. From now on, he was the one responsible for protecting his mother. And if he wanted to keep her safe, he needed to gather his courage and eliminate the monsters who had hurt her. As the disgusting smirks of the thugs flashed through his mind, a wave of anger surged within the boy. Fueled by rage and newfound determination, he charged at them, striking them down one by one. The mother's horrified gaze never left her son, and though the thugs were finally gone, the boy's heart remained heavy. He knew that no matter how many enemies he defeated, his father was never coming back. Overwhelmed by grief and frustration, he turned to Zhang and asked if his father was really gone, pushing up daisies now. Zhang, with a heavy heart, gave him a solemn yes. Unable to bear the weight of reality, the boy let the bloodied knife slip from his hands and ran straight into his mother's embrace, holding her tightly, searching for comfort in her warmth. Desperate to keep her son safe, the mother turned to Zhang and pleaded with him to take the boy with him, offering to do anything in return. But before Zhang could respond, the boy wiped his tears and declared that he wanted to stay with his mother and protect her himself. Seeing his determination, Zhang made an offer to both of them. He invited them to come with him. He revealed that he had promised Jiang Shigi to keep them safe. With that assurance, the mother and son agreed to follow him, walking past the lifeless bodies of the thugs who had once tormented them. As they moved on, the boy, Shuai, glanced at the corpses scattered around, fear creeping into his eyes. What terrified him more, however, was the man who had taken them down so effortlessly. Noticing the unease in the boy's face, Zhang, with his usual calm, simply stated that he was the one who had dealt with them all. Just then, Zhang raised his hand, signaling them to stop. His sharp instincts picked up on something suspicious nearby. Turning to Xiaoli, the mother, he asked if she knew where Building 8 in Banyan Garden was. Xiaoli, slightly confused, pointed in the direction ahead and reminded him that he was already facing the right way. Curiously, she asked why he wanted to know. The scene shifts to Building 8, where a group of looters stands outside, demanding supplies from the terrified residents inside. They shout threats, assuring everyone that if they surrender their resources, they'll be spared. But deep down, everyone knows it's a lie. Inside the apartments, tension fills the air as our team debates whether they should give in. The fear is real, but Officer Lee quickly shuts down the idea, his voice firm. He reminds everyone that these looters are nothing more than animals. They won't keep their word. If they surrender, the men will be killed, and the women, well, they'll suffer a fate worse than death. Outside, the thugs grow impatient, giving them just 10 minutes to comply or face the consequences. The pressure is too much for one of the women, and she hesitantly suggests going outside to beg for mercy. But another woman immediately protests, refusing to become a plaything for those monsters. Before the argument can escalate, the gorilla stops them, silencing them both with a calm but commanding voice. There's no need to panic. Surrendering isn't an option. He assures them that they have a plan and instructs them to guard the hallway, confident that the looters won't be able to break through. Meanwhile, outside, the gang leader watches the building with a smirk. He knows they're well armed, but his lackey isn't so sure. The guy voices his doubts, pointing out that forcing their way in won't be easy, especially since the survivors inside are armed and staying hidden, making an ambush even more difficult. But the leader only chuckles, his eyes gleaming with cunning. There's no need for brute force. Instead, he orders his men to cut off the water supply to the first-floor apartments. Smirking, he decides to wait and see how long they can hold out without it. As the looters set their plan into motion, Zhang Xiao stands nearby, watching them carefully. Beside him, little Shuai looks up and innocently asks if these men are bad people. Zhang can't help but find the irony in the question, especially coming from Shuai, the same kid who just took down 3 grown men with nothing but a dagger. Despite everything, the boy's childlike innocence hasn't faded. Zhang sighs and reminds him that these are the same kind of people who bullied his mother. And that's exactly why they need to be dealt with. Back inside, Officer Li takes charge, instructing everyone to guard the stairs and stay hidden. He plans to check things out himself. Moving cautiously, he creeps over to the window and sneaks a glance outside. 7 looters, all armed, 3 of them carrying guns. Just as he processes the situation, a sudden loud bang echoes through the air, catching him off guard. His heart pounds in his chest as the rest of the group freezes, confusion and fear spreading through them. No one knows what just happened. As the chaos unfolds, bullets tear through the air, ripping apart the thugs, and one of their men goes down, and the rest are left clueless, frantically looking around to figure out who's attacking them. That's when Officer Li spots him, Zhang Xiaoyong, gun in hand, steadily making his way forward. Without hesitation, Zhang opens fire again. A single shot lands right between the eyes of one of the goons, dropping him instantly. As the remaining thugs spot him standing in the middle of their circle, they panic and start firing their pistols wildly. But Zhang just keeps walking, completely unfazed. Not a single bullet even grazes him, and that only makes him smirk. Watching their sloppy aim, he can't help but find their attempts laughable. Raising his gun, he takes aim at the leader hiding behind a concrete block, but his bullets only manage to chip away at the surface. Frustrated, the boss barks at his lackeys to stop messing around and fire back properly. One of the thugs, finally gathering his courage, stands up with determination, ready to take Zhang down himself. But before he can do anything, Zhang smoothly adjusts his aim and, with just a couple of shots, blows the guy's head off. The leader, still crouched behind the block, sneers. In his mind, Zhang must be out of bullets by now. Feeling smug, he decides it's his turn, raising his gun to fire. But Zhang meets his gaze with a cold, unwavering stare, standing tall without a hint of fear. The moment the thug pulls the trigger, Zhang moves with lightning speed, effortlessly dodging the shot. Before the thug can react, Zhang grabs his arm, the one holding the gun, and in a swift motion, turns it upward, pressing the barrel right under his neck. Without a second thought, Zhang pulls the trigger, sending a bullet straight through the thug's skull. Just like that, the entire squad of criminals is taken care of. Without wasting a moment, Zhang rummages through the leader's dead body, searching for anything useful. Once he's done, he steps into the building, only to be greeted by the last remaining goons of the squad. Desperation fuels them as they charge at him, but Zhang doesn't even flinch. He stays rooted in place, calm and collected. The silence is shattered by 3 crisp gunshots, each perfectly placed, dropping the thugs one after another. Watching all of this, Shuai is over the moon, his excitement barely contained. He's beyond impressed with how effortlessly Zhang handled the fight, and can't help but admire him even more. Just then, a system notification appears in front of Zhang, revealing his next objective: recruit survivors from Rangxiang. Completing this task promises a valuable reward. Curious, Zhang asks about these people, and Officer Li responds, explaining that they're from the Bichue villas, located to the south of the city. Officer Li quickly called over the 2 men in yellow jackets, Lu Chao and Chenji, instructing them to brief Brother Yang about Bichue since they had just come from the south. Without hesitation, the 2 men shared what they knew. The people in Bichue weren't just survivors. They were an organized gang, well-armed and well-supplied, holed up in Bichue villas. They had taken in nearly all the survivors from the southern regions. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaoyong paused for a moment, memories from his past life flooding back. He couldn't help but wonder if Bichui was where Li Shushan and Qiujing settlements had been. Could it be them who had taken over? He turned to Lu Chao and Qinji, asking if they meant that Bichui was the only settlement left in the south. One of the men nodded, explaining that it hadn't always been this way. The gang, armed to the teeth, had crushed smaller settlements one by one. Wherever they went, they slaughtered half the population, abducted young women, and recruited anyone willing to submit. Zhang Xiaoyong was sure now. He knew exactly who was behind this. Officer Li, noticing his certainty, asked what he meant. Without hesitation, Zhang pointed out that the 3 guys they had just taken down were carrying handguns, which meant there were likely more of them out there. He told the men to hold onto the guns and check for extra magazines. There was no doubt they'd need them. Handing over his rifle to Officer Li, Zhang told him to keep it, adding that he'd leave them with 5 magazines. Zhang chimed in, warning that the Bichui crew wouldn't let this go easily, but with these weapons, 10 or so men should be able to hold their ground. Zhang then instructed them to stay put for a couple of days while he reorganized things back home. After that, he would return and personally deal with the Bichui gang. His words left one of the men standing nearby in shock. Was Zhang seriously planning to take on Bichui? The man pointed out that the gang was probably dozens strong. If not more, it wasn't a small task to go against them. Officer Li, clearly concerned, tried to talk him out of it. He suggested that it wasn't worth the risk and that they could always look for another place to settle. But Zhang simply told him not to worry. He already had unfinished business with the Bichui crew. Besides, in a few days, he planned to come back with a bigger vehicle and evacuate everyone to the east of the city, near the old Tea Leaf City, where he was building a stronghold. He would need all the help he could get. With that, Zhang turned to leave, casually tossing a goodbye over his shoulder and telling them to take care of themselves. Taking Xiaoli and Shui with him, he walked away, ready for what was to come.